Somewhere far away, on a world made almost entirely of sand, the night has come, and the desert has gone quiet in the way only a desert can. The heat of the day has lifted from the dunes and drifted up into a sky so crowded with stars that it hardly looks real. The sand, which burned like a furnace under the twin light of noon, now cools grain by grain, and if you were to press your hand into it, you would feel the warmth leaving it slowly, patiently, the way sleep comes to a tired body. This is the planet they call Arrakis. Most of the universe knows it by a shorter, older, harder name. They call it Dune. And tonight we are going to lie down beside it in our imagination and let its great story carry us gently towards sleep. Before we go on, and while the desert is still cool and quiet around us, let me say one small thing, and then I will not interrupt the calm again. If you find that these slow journeys through old and beautiful stories help carry you toward rest, it would mean a great deal if you would subscribe to this channel. There is nothing to do right now, nothing that need pull you back toward waking. Subscribing simply helps this quiet place keep going, and it helps other people who lie awake at night, who are searching for something soft to listen to, find their way here too. That is all. You can let the thought go now, the way you let go of everything else tonight, and sink a little deeper into the pillow. Dune is, by the reckoning of many, the greatest science fiction story ever told. It is a tale of a desert world and the precious substance hidden inside it, of a young man born to a noble house who becomes something far stranger than noble, of an emperor and his rivals, of a people who ride monsters across an ocean of sand. It is vast, and it is beautiful, and it has been loved for more than half a century. And yet, when the day is done and the lights are low, and you find yourself turning the story over slowly in your mind, something curious happens. You begin to notice places where the fabric of it seems to loosen. Threads that, when you pull them ever so gently, appear at first to come undone. Questions the story raises and does not answer aloud. People call these things plot holes, as though they were mistakes, little gaps where the storyteller looked away. But we are not going to treat them as mistakes tonight. We are going to treat them as doorways. We are going to walk through 5 of them together, one soft step at a time, and let each mystery become a kind of lullaby. So let me tell you where we are going, so that you can settle in and know there is nothing to hold on to, nothing to remember, only a path already laid out for you. There are 5 great puzzles in the story of Dune, and we will wander through all 5 before the night is over. The first is the puzzle of the spice. In all the endless reach of the universe, across countless worlds and countless stars, the most precious substance there is, the one thing every empire and every traveler depends upon, is found on one single planet, and only there. We will ask, softly, how such a thing could be, and why in 10,000 years no one ever changed it. The second is the puzzle of the chosen one who arrived too soon. For thousands of years, a secret order of women bred human bloodlines together like a gardener crossing flowers, all to bring forth a single promised being. And then, in a single moment, out of love rather than obedience, a woman broke their careful plan, and the promised being was born anyway, a whole generation early. We will wonder how a plan so long could be both ruined and fulfilled by one quiet act of the heart. The third is the puzzle of the vanished machines. Long before the story we know, humanity rose up and destroyed all of its thinking machines, all its computers, and forbade them forever. And yet the people of this future still cross the black gulfs between the stars, still fly, still fight with shields, and strange weapons. We will ask how a civilization runs a galaxy with no computers at all, and where the line falls between a forbidden mind and an allowed machine. The fourth is the puzzle of the prophet caught in his own vision. The young man at the center of it all gains the power to see the future, and what he sees there fills him with dread, a holy war fought in his name across the stars. He hates it. He does everything he can to turn away from it. And still, every road leads him to it. We will wonder how a man who can see what is coming cannot simply choose another way. And the fifth is the puzzle of the hidden people. A great empire ruled the desert planet for many long years and believed the native folk of that world to be few, scattered, and of little account. But hidden in the deep desert, out beyond the maps, lived millions of them, hardened and disciplined and waiting. We will ask how the most powerful rulers in the universe could look at a whole world and simply fail to see the people living on it. 5 puzzles then, the spice on a single world. The chosen one who came too early. The empire that outlawed its own machines. The prophet trapped inside his visions. And the hidden nation the powerful never counted. We will drift through each of them slowly, gently turning them over the way you might turn a smooth stone in your fingers before setting it down. And by the end you may find that not one of them is truly a whole at all. You may find that each of them is holding the whole story up. Now, let us return to the sand. Picture it once more, that endless rolling country of dunes under the stars, ridge after ridge of it fading into the dark, each crest touched faintly silver, each hollow pooled with shadow. There is no water here that you can see. There are no rivers, no lakes, no gentle green fields. There is only the sand and the wind that moves across it, and far below the surface, in the deep places, there are creatures so enormous that they are less like animals than like slow-moving hills. Monsters the people of this world both fear and worship. And woven through all of it, glittering faintly in the dunes at dawn, carried on the wind as a scent something like cinnamon, is the reason the whole universe turns its eyes toward this one small, harsh, forgotten planet. The people who live here have a saying, that the desert takes everything and gives back only what it chooses. It is a hard place to love, and yet it is loved fiercely by those who call it home. And it is coveted endlessly by those who do not, because of what it holds. Empires have risen and fallen over it. Noble houses have been raised up and destroyed over it. And through it, all the sand simply goes on being sand, indifferent, patient, ancient, keeping its secrets the way the deep desert keeps its dead. Tonight, none of that struggle can reach you. You are only a quiet watcher on a cool dune, under a sky full of stars, here to wonder and then to rest. We will begin in a little while with the first and perhaps the deepest of our 5 puzzles, the strange and beautiful mystery of the spice, and why in all the vast wheeling universe it can be found in only one place. But there is no hurry. The night is long, and it belongs entirely to you. Let your breath slow. Let your shoulders soften into the bed. Let the desert cool around you, grain by grain, star by star, and simply drift, while we begin to pull, ever so gently, on the very first loosening thread. To understand the first puzzle, the one about the spice, we must first understand the spice itself, and what it means to the universe of Dune. Its proper name is melange, a soft and rolling word, and it is the single most valuable substance known to any living being across all the settled worlds. There is nothing else quite like it, nothing that comes close, nothing that can stand in for it. And the strange, dizzying truth of it all is that this one substance, without which the entire order of the universe would fall apart, is found in only one place. It seeps up out of the sands of Arrakis and nowhere else at all. Let us take our time with what the spice actually does, because it is only when you understand how completely everything depends upon it that the puzzle begins to open like a flower in the dark. Imagine a substance that, when a person takes it steadily over many years, lengthens their life far beyond its natural span, so that those who can afford it live on, their eyes slowly turning a deep and startling blue as the spice soaks into them. Imagine a substance that sharpens the mind, that widens awareness, that lets a person feel more, sense more, understand more than they ever could without it. Imagine that it becomes woven into the food, the drink, the very air of the wealthy, so that to live at the heart of civilization is to breathe melange every day. That alone would make it precious beyond counting. But that is only the beginning of what it does. The deepest and most important gift of the spice is stranger still, and it has to do with the way people travel between the stars. The distances between worlds in this universe are so vast that no ordinary ship could ever cross them within a single human life. To go from one star to another, the great ships of the Spacing Guild fold space itself, bending the emptiness so that a ship may pass from one point to another far away, without truly crossing the distance in between. It is a wondrous thing, this folding of space, and it is also terribly dangerous, because to fold space blindly is to risk arriving inside a star, or a planet, or nowhere at all. Something must guide the ship safely through. And here is where the spice becomes the very spine of the universe. For the ones who guide these ships, the navigators of the guild, immerse themselves in melange in enormous quantities, so much and so deeply that their bodies are changed by it over the years. And, in return, the spice grants them a limited sight into what is to come. They can perceive, dimly, the safe path through the fold before the ship ever moves. They can see which route leads through and which route leads to death. Without the spice, that sight vanishes. Without that sight, the ships cannot safely fold space. And without the folding of space, every world in the universe is cut off from every other, each one alone again across gulfs no ship could cross in 1,000 lifetimes. Think, then, of what the spice holds together: trade between worlds, the movement of armies and grain and mail and travelers, the reach of the emperor, whose power depends upon being able to send his forces anywhere, the great trading combine that binds the economies of 1,000 planets, the noble houses scattered across the stars, kept in their delicate balance only because they can reach one another. Every thread of the whole vast tapestry of civilization runs, in the end, back to melange. Cut the spice, and the tapestry does not merely fray. It falls to the floor in pieces. Every world becomes an island. Every island slowly forgets the others exist. The lights of the great civilization go out one by one, and there would be no way to relight them, because there would be no way to travel from one to the next. So the spice is not merely valuable in the way that gold or jewels are valuable. It is not a luxury that the rich enjoy and the poor go without. It is the foundation stone beneath everything. It is the water in which the whole civilization swims, so present, so necessary, that most people never even stop to think about it. The same way you rarely stop to think about the air you are breathing right now, softly, in and out, as you lie there in the dark. The whole universe drinks from the spice, and the whole universe would die without it. And now, holding all of that in your mind, gently, without gripping it too tightly, let us look at the one fact that makes the first puzzle glow. This substance, this foundation of everything, this thing more precious than any other in all the reach of the stars, comes from one planet. Not from 100 worlds, not from a scattered dozen, not even from 2. From one. From Arrakis. From the sands of Dune, and nowhere else that anyone has ever found. Picture what that means for a moment, slowly, in all the enormous sweep of settled space, with its uncountable suns and its uncountable worlds, with deserts on many planets, and heat on many planets, and strange minerals and rare growths of every kind. The one substance that everything depends upon can be gathered in only one location. Every dose of spice that has ever extended a life, every measure of it breathed by an emperor, every grain of it that has ever let a navigator steer a ship safely between the stars, has come up out of the same desert. There is no second source. There is no backup. There is no other well to draw from should the first run dry. The entire structure of the universe balances, like an enormous inverted pyramid, on a single small and burning point of sand. It is the kind of arrangement that would make any careful person uneasy. Imagine a great city where all the water for every home, every field, every fountain came from a single spring, and there was no other anywhere, and everyone knew it. How closely they would watch that spring, how fiercely they would guard it, how the whole life of the city would arrange itself around that one fragile source. That is Arrakis, but the city is the entire universe, and the spring is a desert planet where the sand itself glitters faintly with the most precious thing there is. And so, whoever controls Arrakis controls the spice, and whoever controls the spice controls the movement of the stars themselves, the travel, the trade, the reach of every power. There is an old and famous idea in the story of Dune that the one who can destroy a thing is the one who truly controls it, and it is spoken of the spice. Because a power that could threaten to burn the source, to end the flow of melange forever, would hold every other power in the universe by the throat. This is why the desert planet, harsh and poor and nearly unlivable, ringed by nothing but heat and death, is nonetheless the single most contested prize in all of creation. Kings would trade rich green worlds for it. Houses would spend their whole strength to hold it, all for a bitter place where a person can die of thirst in an afternoon. There is something almost beautiful in the strangeness of it when you let it settle over you like a blanket. An entire civilization spanning the whole of the night sky, resting its full weight upon grains of sand blown across a single dying hot world. The most sophisticated empire ever built, and its beating heart is a desert. And tomorrow, in the next quiet stretch of our journey, we will ask the question that this arrangement seems to demand, the question that turns this wonder into a puzzle. Why only there? Why, in 10,000 years of cleverness and desperation and need, did no one ever find another way? But that is for a little later. For now, simply rest in the wonder of it, the whole universe held up by sand, and let your breathing grow slow, and even as the desert cools around you in the dark. So we come now to the heart of the first puzzle, and we will hold it gently, the way you would cup a little water in the desert, carefully without spilling. We have seen that the spice is the foundation of the entire universe, and we have seen that it comes from one planet only. And now the question rises quietly to the surface, the question that anyone lying awake and turning the story over is bound to reach. Why only there? In all the long ages of this civilization, why did no one ever break the monopoly of the sand? Consider how much time we are speaking of. This is not a young civilization, freshly arrived among the stars, still learning its way. This is an empire that has stood for many thousands of years. The great turning point of its history, the the war against the thinking machines lies more than 10,000 years in its past. 10,000 years. Try, softly, to hold that span in your mind. 10,000 years of scholars and inventors, of merchants and schemers, of desperate powers who would have given almost anything to hold in their own hands the one substance the whole universe craves. 10,000 years is long enough for languages to be born and forgotten many times over. It is long enough for whole ways of life to rise and fall and rise again. And in all of that immense stretch of time, with the smartest and most ruthless people in existence bending their whole will toward it, no one ever found a way to make the spice anywhere but Arrakis, or to move its making somewhere else. And it is not as though the motive were lacking. Quite the opposite. There has never in the history of anything been a stronger reason to try. Whoever could produce spice away from Arrakis would become, in an afternoon, the richest and most powerful being in the universe. Free of the desert planet forever. Free of the emperor who guards it and the houses who fight over it. The prize for solving this problem is nothing less than the throne of everything. Every incentive that could exist, existed. Every hunger that could drive a mind to solve a problem was present and multiplied by the wealth of 1,000 worlds. And still, the sand kept its monopoly. Think of all the paths that seem, at first, so obvious. The first and simplest would be to make the spice artificially, in a laboratory, molecule by molecule. The people of this universe are not primitive. They have crossed the stars. They have mastered strange sciences we can barely imagine. Surely, you would think, somewhere in 10,000 years, some patient chemist in some quiet laboratory on some forgotten world would have taken the spice apart, understood how it was built, and learned to build it again from ordinary matter. And yet, no one did, not for the longest time, not through age after age of trying. The second path seems just as obvious. If you cannot make the spice in a jar, then grow it somewhere else. Take whatever produces it on Arrakis and carry that living thing to another desert, on another planet, and let it flourish there under a friendlier sun. The universe is full of worlds. Surely one of them could be coaxed into becoming a second Arrakis, a second source, so that the whole of creation would no longer hang upon a single thread. And yet no second Arrakis was ever grown. The spice stayed stubbornly, impossibly, only where it had always been. And there is a third path, stranger and bolder, which the wiser characters in the story do eventually come to understand. For the spice, it turns out, is bound up with the great creatures of the deep desert, the enormous sandworms that move beneath the dunes like slow-living mountains. If the worms are somehow tied to the making of the spice, then why not simply take the worms, capture one or many, and carry them off to another world, and set them loose in another desert, and let them make the spice there? It is a monstrous task to move a creature the size of a hill, but the reward would be the universe itself. And still, across all those thousands of years, the monopoly held. The worms stayed on Dune. The spice stayed on Dune, and every power in existence remained, whether it liked it or not, a servant to a single planet. Now, when a puzzle like this presents itself, there is a lazy way to answer it, and a patient way. The lazy way is to say that the storyteller simply did not think it through, that it is a gap, a flaw, a place where the tale is thin. But the patient way, the way that rewards you as you drift toward sleep, is to sit with the strangeness a little longer and ask whether the impossibility itself might be pointing at something true. Because a universe in which everyone wants a thing, and everyone has thousands of years to get it, and no one ever manages, is telling you something. It is telling you that the barrier is not laziness or bad luck. The barrier must be woven into the very nature of the thing. And that is exactly the shape of the answer, though we will save its full unfolding for a little later, when the night is deeper. For now it is enough to feel the weight of the mystery pressing down, softly, like a heavy quilt. Enough to sense that the spice is not simply a mineral that happens to lie in one place, the way gold might lie in one mountain. If it were only that, someone would have dug it up elsewhere, or made it, or moved it long ago. The fact that no one ever could, across an unimaginable span of time and with the strongest motive there has ever been, means that the spice must be tangled up with something far larger than itself. Something about the whole living world of Arrakis. Something that cannot be picked up and carried away, because it is not a thing at all, but a process, a cycle, an entire ecology holding hands with itself across a whole planet. It is worth pausing here, in the cool of the dune, to feel how unusual that is. In most stories, and in most of our own thinking, when a thing is rare, it is rare, because there is only a little of it. A small vein of ore, a single field of a certain flower, a hoard that will one day run out. Rarity, we assume, is a matter of quantity. But the rarity of the spice is not like that at all. It is not that there is only a little spice. It is that spice can only ever come to be in one place, no matter how much of it there is. You could gather all the wealth and cleverness of 1,000 worlds and pour it into the problem, and you would still be no closer, because the problem is not one of quantity, but of kind. And a scarcity of that sort, a scarcity woven into the very rules of the world, is far deeper and far more unshakable than any mere shortage of supply. There is a quiet lesson hidden in this, one gentle enough to fall asleep upon. We are used to thinking of valuable things as objects, things you can hold, move, own, hoard, a coin, a jewel, a grain of spice. But the most precious thing in the universe of Dune turns out not to be an object at all. It is the fruit of a living system so vast and so delicately balanced that no one can lift it out of its cradle without breaking it. You cannot steal a sunrise. You cannot carry away a season. And, it turns out, you cannot simply pocket the spice and grow it in a pot on another world, because the spice is less like a stone and more like a tide, the product of forces that move across an entire planet in slow and ancient rhythms. So the first puzzle, which looked at first like a flaw, like a careless gap in the design, begins to turn in the moonlight and show a different face. The question of why the spice exists only on Arrakis is not a hole the storyteller forgot to fill. It is a door, and behind it lies one of the most beautiful ideas in all of the story. The secret life of the sandworms and the desert they made. That is where we will go next, softly, when you are ready, into the deep biology of Dune and the strange and lovely reason the sand keeps its treasure to itself. But there is no need to hurry there now. Let the question rest beside you, unanswered and unhurried. Let the mystery be a comfort rather than a call to think. And let your breath go slow and deep, in and out, like the tide that made the spice, while the desert holds its ancient secret and you drift a little further toward the dark and gentle water of sleep. And so, we come to the part of the story where the puzzle dissolves, where the loosened thread, when we follow it all the way in, turns out not to unravel the fabric at all, but to be the very stitch that holds it together. To understand why the spice lives only on Arrakis, we have to go down beneath the dunes into the slow and hidden life of the great worms. and into the strange history of how a whole planet became a desert in the first place. The sandworms of Arrakis are among the most wondrous creatures in all of storytelling. Full-grown, they are enormous, beyond easy imagining, long as a range of hills, moving beneath the sand in great silent surges that the Fremen learned to read like weather. The people of the desert call the worm Shai-Hulud, and they hold it in something close to reverence, part terror and part worship. For the worm is both the great danger of their world and, in a way they understand better than any outsider, its maker. But the worm does not begin as a worm. Like so many creatures, it has a younger form, a smaller and stranger self that comes before, and it is in that early form that the deepest secret of the spice is hidden. In its youngest stage, the creature is not a mountain moving under the sand, but a small thing, a kind of larval swimmer, which the story calls sand trout. And the sand trout have a single overwhelming purpose that shapes the entire planet. They hunt for water. Wherever water gathers, the sand trout find it, and they surround it, and they seal it away, carrying it down and locking it deep beneath the surface, away from the open air, away from the land. They do this because water, to the grown worm they will one day become, is a poison. The great worms cannot bear it. Open water will sicken them, and enough of it will kill them. And so the young form of the creature spends itself tirelessly gathering up every trace of moisture on the world and burying it far below, drying the surface, drinking the rivers, emptying the lakes, until the whole planet is turned, over long ages, into the vast and burning desert we have been picturing all this while. Sit with that for a moment, gently, because it is a beautiful and terrible idea. The desert of Arrakis is not simply a place that happens to be dry. It is a thing that was made dry, deliberately, by the creatures that live in it, so that they themselves could live. The worms did not merely find a desert. The worms are the reason there is a desert at all. The dunes, the killing heat, the utter absence of open water, the whole harsh face of the planet that makes it so hard to hold and so precious to own, all of it is the slow handiwork of the very creatures tangled up with the spice. The world and its monsters made each other, and the spice itself is born somewhere in the depths of this cycle. It is a byproduct of the worms and their long life, produced through a slow and intricate weaving of chemistry and biology in the deep sand, bound to the presence of the creatures, to the dryness they create, to the whole vast machinery of the desert working upon itself over uncounted years. The spice is not a mineral waiting in the rock. It is more like a fruit, or a residue, or an exhalation of an entire living planet. The way a forest breathes out its particular scent, the way a marsh brings forth its particular life. It cannot be separated from the system that makes it, because it is not a thing the system contains. It is a thing the system does. And now, at last, the first puzzle opens all the way, and you can see clear through it. Why did no one ever move the spice to another world? Because to move the spice, you would have to move the worms. And to move the worms, you would have to give them a desert as vast and as deep and as bone-dry as the one on Arrakis, a desert that took untold ages and the labor of countless generations of the creatures themselves to create. And even then, the smallest presence of water, a single hidden sea, a single wet season, would be poison to the very creatures you were trying to establish. You cannot carry away the spice, because the spice is the last small blossom of an entire planet-sized process, and you cannot fit a planet into a ship. You cannot grow a second Arrakis in a lifetime, or in 10 lifetimes, because Arrakis, was not grown in a lifetime. It was grown across an abyss of time by the slow, patient thirst of the worms. The monopoly was never a matter of anyone failing to try hard enough. The monopoly is written into the biology of the thing itself. There is a further turn of the thread, one that the deeper reaches of the story reveal, and it is worth touching gently before we let the whole matter settle. In the long unfolding of the tale, across the later books, there does eventually come a way to make an artificial spice, produced not from the desert but by cunning and secretive artisans in their own laboratories after ages of trying. So it is not that the thing is forever and absolutely impossible. It is that it is very nearly impossible. Impossible for the longest time. Impossible across the whole span in which the story we love takes place, and possible at last only through an effort so extreme that it changes the balance of everything when it finally arrives. The near impossibility is real, and it lasts long enough to shape the entire history of the universe. And this is where the puzzle stops being a puzzle and becomes instead the engine of the whole story. Because a substance that everyone needs, that comes from only one place, that cannot be made or moved or copied, is not a flaw in the world of Dune. It is the reason the world of Dune has the shape it has. It is why one small desert planet is the center of the universe. It is why emperors and noble houses and secret orders all circle Arrakis like moths around a single flame. It is why holding the desert means holding creation, and losing it means losing everything. Every scheme, every betrayal, every war in the story flows downhill from this one fact, this one grain of impossibility at the heart of it all. Remove it, let the spice be made anywhere, and the whole tower of the story simply falls, because there would be nothing to fight over, nowhere that mattered more than anywhere else, no burning point of sand for the universe to balance upon. So the thread we pulled, so carefully, at the very start, has led us not to a tear in the fabric, but to the knot that holds the whole cloth together. What looked like the storyteller forgetting to explain something turns out to be one of the most carefully imagined ideas in all of science fiction, an entire ecology invented so completely that its central mystery answers itself the moment you look closely enough. The spice exists only on Arrakis, because Arrakis is not merely where the spice is found. Arrakis is what the spice is. The planet and the treasure are one and the same living thing. Let that be the gentle thought you carry down with you now. The first of our 5 doors swung quietly open. An entire civilization balanced upon a single desert, and the reason for it not a mistake, but a marvel. A whole world of thirsty creatures slowly drying their planet to dust so that the most precious substance in the universe could be born in the sand. There is a deep peace in a mystery that turns out to make perfect sense. Rest in it. The worms move slowly beneath the dunes, the desert cools beneath the stars, and there is nothing at all for you to solve. The next of our 5 puzzles will be waiting when the time comes. But for now, simply let your breath rise and fall like the sand, and let yourself sink slowly and softly, a little deeper into the quiet. Let us leave the desert for a little while and drift instead into something quieter and stranger, into the long, patient shadow of an order of women who thought not in years, but in centuries. If the spice was the first great puzzle of Dune, a treasure balanced on a single grain of sand, then the second puzzle is a puzzle of blood and of memory, and of the slow shaping of a human being across 90 generations. Settle in and let your breathing slow, because this thread unspools gently, and it will take some time. There is, in the universe of Dune, a sisterhood called the Bene Gesserit. You may picture them in dark robes, moving softly through the great houses of the empire, always present, rarely explained. They serve as advisors, as truth-sayers, as teachers of noble daughters, as the quiet keepers of secrets that emperors would kill to learn. To the outside world, they seem like a school, or an order of wise women, or perhaps a kind of religious sisterhood, and they are all of those things. But beneath the robes and the courtesies lies something far older and far more ambitious than any of the great houses ever fully understood. The Bene Gesserit have trained themselves over uncounted years to master the human body and the human mind to a degree that looks, to the untrained eye, like sorcery. A trained sister can read the smallest flicker of a face, the slightest change in breath, the tiny tightening at the corner of a mouth, and know when a person is lying. She can control her own body from within, slowing her heartbeat, neutralizing poisons, choosing even the sex of a child she carries. She can command another person with nothing but the pitch and weight of her voice, the discipline they call the voice, bending the will of anyone who has not been trained to resist it. And deepest of all, a sister who has passed through a certain terrible ordeal can reach back into the memories of all her female ancestors, an unbroken chain of lives stretching back into the dark beginning of the human story. She becomes, in a sense, a living library of everyone who came before her on the mother's side. But here is the thing that matters most for our puzzle tonight. All of that power, all of that discipline, was in service of a single, secret, enormous goal. The Bene Gesserit were not merely gathering knowledge and influence for their own sake. They were breeding. Quietly, deliberately, across thousands of years, they were guiding the bloodlines of the noble houses toward one particular human being who had never yet existed. They were trying to grow a person the way a patient gardener might coax a single impossible flower into bloom, a flower that could take not decades, but geological ages to appear. The name they gave to this hoped-for person was the Kwisatz Haderach. The phrase means, in an old tongue, something like the shortening of the way, the one who can be many places at once. For the sisters could reach only the memories of their mothers and grandmothers, the female line. There was, they believed, a hidden region of ancestral memory that no woman could enter, a place inside the self that turned any sister away, dark and forbidden. And they came to believe that a certain kind of man, born of exactly the right blood, refined across exactly the right number of generations, would be able to look into that forbidden place. He would hold within him both the female memories and the male memories, the whole of the human past, mother and father alike, all the way down. And more than that, they believed such a man would be able to see across time itself, to look forward as well as backward, to stand at the center of the web of what was and what might be, and to bridge space and time in a single mind. Imagine the patience this required. Not the patience of a single lifetime, but the patience of an institution that thinks in the way mountains think. A sister born into the program might spend her whole life advancing it by a single careful step, arranging one marriage, guiding one daughter into one house, and then die, having moved the vast slow machine forward by the width of a hair. Her daughters would continue, their daughters after them. 90 generations, they say, 90 careful turns of the wheel, each one a real human life lived and loved and lost, all of them bent toward a person none of them would ever meet. If you lie here and try to feel the true length of that, it is almost impossible. 90 generations is thousands of years. It is longer than most of the histories we tell ourselves about our own world. And through all of it, the sisterhood kept its records, its bloodline charts, its careful reckonings of which house should marry into which daughter should be born, which traits were coming closer to ripeness. And notice, as we drift here, the coldness of it, and also the strange devotion. There is a kind of love in such patience, the love of the gardener for a bloom she will never see open. But it is not a warm love. It is a love aimed past every living person toward an idea. The women in the program were, in a sense, means to an end, each one a link in a chain, valuable for the blood she carried and the child she could bear more than for the life she herself lived. The sisterhood did not think in the small warm currency of one heart choosing another. It thought in the great cold arithmetic of the species, in bloodlines and probabilities, and slow inevitable convergence. They were writing a person the way one might write an enormous book, one letter per generation, trusting that the sentence would eventually complete itself. Why did they want this being at all? Not, in the end, only for wisdom, though wisdom was part of it. They wanted control. A man who could see across time, who could remember the whole human past and glimpse the branching futures, would be the most powerful individual the universe had ever produced. And the Bene Gesserit intended that he would be theirs, born of their program, raised within their reach, guided by their hands, a tool of unimaginable subtlety wielded by the sisterhood for the shaping of human destiny as they saw fit. They did not merely want to create the Kwisatz Haderach, they wanted to own him. They wanted him to arrive precisely on schedule, precisely under their control, a key cut to fit a lock they alone would hold. And so the plan, in its final generations, grew very specific indeed. It came down at last to a handful of bloodlines, to particular houses, to particular children who must be born. The great slow sentence was nearing its final words. Only a few more careful turns of the wheel remained. The gardener could almost see the shape of the bud. All that was needed now was for the last few links to fall into place exactly as they had been ordered, exactly as the charts required. One daughter married to the right heir, and then, in the generation after that, the flower they had waited 90 generations to grow. Hold that in your mind as you rest. A sisterhood older than any throne, patient past all human patience, reaching across thousands of years toward a single controllable being who would let them steer the fate of the whole human story. Every marriage arranged, every birth foreseen, every daughter a note in a song none of them would live to hear finished. It is a thing of terrible discipline and terrible beauty, this program, and it had never, in all its long unfolding, been broken. And yet the puzzle we will turn over together, softly, in the chapters to come, is exactly this. A plan so vast, so patient, so carefully guarded, calibrated across 90 generations of the most disciplined minds the universe had ever known, came at the last to depend on one woman, in one moment, making one choice. Not a choice of bloodlines or probabilities, a choice of the heart. And the great cold arithmetic, for all its power, had never learned how to hold a thing so warm. But that is a thread for the next quiet stretch of the night. For now, simply let the sisters and their 90 generations drift past you like robed figures in a corridor, and let your breath grow slow and rest. Now we come to the moment where the great slow machine met a single human heart, and something the sisterhood could never have charted quietly happened. Let your thoughts settle around one woman, in one place, carrying one child, and let the whole weight of 90 generations rest on the small, warm decision she was about to make. Her name is Jessica. In the story she is called the Lady Jessica, the the bound concubine of Duke Leto of House Atreides, and the mother of the boy who will become the center of everything. But before she was any of that, she was a daughter of the Bene Gesserit, raised inside the sisterhood, trained in its disciplines, and, most importantly, placed into the great breeding program as one of its final crucial links. She did not, for most of her life, know her own true parentage. She was simply a piece moved carefully across the board, given to Duke Leto not out of politics alone, but because the charts required it. Because her bloodline and his, joined together, brought the long sentence very close to its ending. And the sisterhood had given her one clear instruction, one order that mattered above all others. Jessica was to bear a daughter, not a son. A daughter. This was not a preference. It was the linchpin of the entire final design. For a trained Bene Gesserit can choose the sex of the child she conceives, controlling her own body at the deepest level, and so the order was not a hope, but a command that lay entirely within her power to obey. That daughter, when she grew, was to be married to the young heir of House Harkonnen, the sworn and bitter enemies of House Atreides. And from that union, from the joining of Atreides blood and Harkonnen blood in the next generation, the Kwisatz Haderach was at last to be born, on schedule, under the sisterhood's hand, controllable and theirs. Think of the strangeness and the cruelty of that plan for a moment, gently, without letting it disturb your rest. The two houses hated each other with a hatred as old as their names. And the sisterhood, caring nothing for that hatred except as a variable to be managed, intended to breed the two enemy bloodlines together, using a daughter as the bridge, so that from the very heart of the feud their long-awaited being would arise. The feud, the love, the loyalty, the enmity. All of it was, to the cold arithmetic, merely material. All that was required was that Jessica bear a daughter, and the rest of the great slow sentence would complete itself in due time. But Jessica loved Duke Leto. That is the whole of it, and it is everything. She was not supposed to. Love was not part of her assignment. She had been trained to give herself to him as a tool of the sisterhood, to observe him, to guide his house, to advance the program. And instead, quietly, across the years of their life together, she came to love him truly, the way one person loves another with no arithmetic in it at all. And she knew, as any parent knows, that Leto longed for a son. An heir. A boy to carry his name and his house forward. She knew what it would mean to him. And so, she chose. Out of love for the man, and out of love for the future she wished to give him, Jessica set aside the order of the sisterhood and chose to bear a son. She used the same deep control of her own body that had been trained into her, the very discipline the Bene Gesserit had given her, and she turned it against their design. She conceived a boy. She gave Duke Leto his heir, and the boy was named Paul. With that single choice, in that single quiet act of love, the plan that 90 generations had labored toward seemed to shatter. There was to be no daughter now, no bridge to the Harkonnen heir, no carefully arranged union in the next generation. The long sentence, so close to its final word, appeared to break off unfinished. The gardener had turned away for one moment, and the bloom she had waited thousands of years for would not open after all. Or so it seemed, because here is where the puzzle deepens into something that has held readers awake and wondering for as long as the story has been told. The plan was not merely broken. It was, against all reckoning, fulfilled. For the boy Paul, born a generation early, born of the wrong choice, born outside every chart and every schedule, grew into the very being the sisterhood had spent 90 generations trying to create. Paul Atreides became the Kwisatz Haderach, the one who could reach into the forbidden ancestral memory, both male and female, the whole of the human past, the one who could look across time. The impossible flower bloomed, but it bloomed early, and it bloomed in a garden no one had planted, from a seed sown not by careful design, but by a mother's love. And that is the shape of our second great puzzle, the thread that seems to loosen when you pull it. How can a plan calibrated across 90 generations, guarded by the most disciplined minds in the universe, tracked and charted down to the last careful marriage, be both derailed and completed by one woman making one choice in one moment? If the program was so fragile that a single act of love could ruin it, how was it ever a program at all? And if the outcome arrived anyway, the very being they sought, then what was the point of the 90 generations of patience? Either the plan mattered and Jessica broke it, or the plan did not matter and the being would have come regardless. It cannot, at first glance, be both. And yet the story insists that it is both, that the plan was ruined and fulfilled in the same breath. And there the puzzle sits, quietly refusing to resolve. Turn it over slowly, the way you might turn a smooth stone in your hand in the dark. There is something almost unbearable in the idea that thousands of years of cold calculation could hinge so completely on one warm human decision. It offends the sense of scale. Surely, you might think, a plan that vast should be robust, should have redundancies, should not be able to be undone by a single heart choosing love over instruction. And surely, at the same time, if it could be undone so easily, then its success could not have been so precisely aimed. The two feelings press against each other, and neither one will yield, and that is exactly why the puzzle feels, at first, like a hole in the fabric of the story, a place where the threads do not quite meet. But hold the question loosely, the way sleep asks you to hold everything loosely now. Do not try to force it shut tonight. There is an answer waiting in the next quiet stretch, and it is not the answer that the plan simply got lucky, nor the answer that Herbert made a mistake. The answer, when we drift into it, will turn on a single idea. The idea that the sisterhood did not merely want the Kwisatz Haderach to exist. They wanted him to be theirs. And what Jessica gave the universe was not the being they had designed, but a wilder thing, arriving early, arriving free, arriving beyond their reach. The plan was not broken by accident. It was broken by the one force their arithmetic could never truly own. For now, though, let the puzzle rest unresolved, the way the best puzzles do just before sleep. Picture Jessica, in the quiet of her own body, making her choice, knowing perhaps only dimly what it would cost and what it would create. Picture the great charts of the sisterhood, so nearly complete, and one line upon them quietly refusing to be drawn. Picture the boy Paul, not yet aware of any of it, simply a child born to a mother who loved his father. Picture the vast and patient machine of the sisterhood, grinding forward through the centuries, meeting at last the one small warm thing it could not grind, and faltering and turning aside. There is a kind of quiet mercy in that image, if you let yourself feel it. The sense that no plan, however great, is ever quite large enough to hold every human heart inside it, and that this is not a failing of the world, but a gift woven into it. And let your breathing slow, and let the question soften into the dark, and rest. And now, gently, we come to the part where the puzzle dissolves, not with a loud answer, but with a slow turning, the way a shape you took for a gap in the dark reveals itself when your eyes adjust to be a doorway. Let us pull, very softly, on the thread that seemed to loosen, and watch what happens when we do. The puzzle, you remember, was this: a plan of 90 generations, ruined by one woman's single choice, and yet fulfilled anyway. The very being the sisterhood sought arriving one generation early. It felt like a contradiction, a place where the story could not hold its own weight. But the contradiction lives only as long as we believe the sisterhood wanted one thing. They did not. They wanted two things, and those two things came apart in Jessica's hands. And once you see that, the whole puzzle rearranges itself into something that was never broken at all. The Bene Gesserit did not simply want the Kwisatz Haderach to exist. If mere existence had been the goal, then Jessica gave it to them, early and complete. What they wanted, far more deeply, was a Kwisatz Haderach they could control. This is the quiet key that unlocks everything. Across all those thousands of years, the sisterhood was not only breeding a superhuman, it was building a leash to go with him. The daughter Jessica was ordered to bear, the arranged marriage into House Harkonnen, the birth in the following generation exactly on schedule. All of it was designed so that when the being finally arrived, he would arrive inside the sisterhood's reach, raised by their hands, bound to their guidance. A tool of unimaginable power, held firmly by the ones who made him. They wanted the flower, yes, but they wanted it in their own garden, behind their own walls, blooming at the hour they had chosen. And what Jessica did was not to prevent the flower, it was to plant it wild. By bearing a son one generation early, she gave the universe a Kwisatz Haderach who grew up outside the sisterhood's design, beyond the leash, free of the schedule, shaped by loyalties and loves the program had never accounted for. Paul was raised as the son of a duke in a house the sisterhood did not control. Loving a father the arithmetic had treated as a variable, guided by a mother who had already broken her vows once for love and would break them again. When his powers awakened, they awakened in a person who owed the Bene Gesserit nothing, who saw through their manipulations with the very gifts they had bred into him, and who could not be commanded, could not be steered, could not be owned. This is why, in the story, the coming of Paul is not a triumph for the sisterhood, but their deepest nightmare made flesh. They had feared, always, exactly this: that the being would arrive before they were ready, outside their control, wielding a power greater than any of them, and answering to no one. An uncontrolled Kwisatz Haderach was the one outcome their whole careful design existed to prevent. And it was precisely that outcome that Jessica's love brought into the world. So the plan was not ruined by accident and then fulfilled by luck. The plan was fulfilled in its lesser sense, the being exists, and defeated in its greater sense, the being is free. And both of those things are the same event, the birth of a son instead of a daughter. Seen this way, there is no contradiction at all. There is only the difference between making a thing and owning it, and those two came apart in one choice. But there is a second strand to the dissolving, and it is woven through the sand itself.
Ask why Paul awakened when he did, so fully, so early. Part of the answer is his bloodline, the 90 generations that brought his latent gifts to the edge of ripeness. But the other part is the planet. When House Atreides is given Arrakis, Jessica and Paul come to live on the one world where the spice saturates everything: the air, the food, the very dust that settles on the skin.
And the spice, that same substance that lets the guild fold space and lets the sisters reach their ancestral memory, is the great opener of the inner eye. Paul, already bred to the threshold, is steeped in melange as no air before him ever was. The desert itself becomes the final ingredient the sisterhood never controlled, accelerating him, unfolding his awareness far faster and far further than any careful program on some gentle homeworld ever could have. The very planet that is the center of our first puzzle becomes the catalyst of our second. The spice that no one could synthesize is the spice that awakens the one who cannot be owned. And so the thread that seemed to loosen turns out to be a thread that was holding something up all along. Consider what Herbert built here, and let it settle over you softly. He did not write a plan that failed by chance. He wrote a story in which the coldest, most patient calculation the universe had ever produced was undone by the one thing calculation can never fully hold, which is love. The sisterhood could chart bloodlines across thousands of years. It could arrange marriages, foresee births, control the sex of children, read the smallest lie in a human face. It could do almost anything except command a heart to stop choosing. Jessica loved Leto and wished to give him a son, and that single warm variable, so small against 90 generations, was the one the great machine could not account for. The plan was not fragile because Herbert made it fragile. It was fragile at exactly one point, and that point was the human heart, and that is not a flaw in the story. It is the meaning of the story. Feel how the puzzle changes shape when you hold it this way. At first it looked like a mistake, a plan too easily broken, an outcome too conveniently achieved, but turned slowly in the quiet, it becomes something almost tender. Of course the plan hinged on one choice. That is the whole point. A universe that could be entirely planned, entirely owned, entirely calculated, would be a universe with no room left for a mother to love a father, no room for a wild thing to grow beyond the wall, no room for the unforeseen to arrive early and free. The sisterhood's failure is the space where human freedom lives. The hole is not a gap where the story falls through. It is a doorway through which the most important idea in the whole tale walks in. And there is a further, quieter echo waiting in the books beyond for those who go deeper. The uncontrolled Kwisatz Haderach, once loose in the world, sets in motion consequences the sisterhood could neither stop nor steer. A chain of events that runs far past their reckoning into burdens carried by Paul and later by his son, into a long and terrible path taken to save the human future from itself. The one broken thread unravels an entire tapestry of destiny. But that is a story for other nights. For now it is enough to have watched one puzzle dissolve, to have seen how a plan could be ruined and fulfilled in a single act, and how the ruin was not a mistake, but the very heart of the thing. So let it go now, gently, the way you let go of a thought as sleep comes near. The sisterhood, patient past all patience, reaching for a being they could own, a woman who loved a man and chose to give him a son. A boy born early, born free, awakened by the dust of a desert world into powers no one could command. And a plan that broke at exactly one point, the point where love lives, which was never a weakness in the design, but the truest thing in it. There is comfort in this, if you look for it as your thoughts grow slow. It means the future was never fully written by the cold and patient calculators of the world. It means that somewhere inside even the greatest design there remains a small, warm room where a person may choose, and where that choosing matters, and where love may still, against all the arithmetic of the ages, change everything. Rest now. The hole has become a doorway, and there is nothing left in it to trouble you. Let the sand settle. Let the questions soften into the dark. And breathe slow. Let us turn now to the third of our great puzzles, and to do so we must travel very far back in the history of this universe. Long before Paul, long before the sisterhood's 90 generations reached their strange fruit. Back into a war so old that by the time of our story, it has become almost a scripture. Settle in and let the desert and the bloodlines fade for a while, because tonight we go looking for the reason there is not a single computer anywhere in this galaxy-spanning empire, and why that absence, which seems at first like an odd gap in a story so full of advanced marvels, turns out to be the ground the whole world stands upon. Here is the first thing to hold in your mind, softly. The universe of Dune is thousands of years in our own future, an empire spread across 1,000,000 worlds, folding space to cross the gulfs between stars. And yet in all of that vast civilization there is not one thinking machine, no artificial minds, no computers as we would know them, no robots reasoning in the dark, no networks quietly deciding things on behalf of human beings. This is not because they never had such machines. It is because, long ago, humanity rose up and destroyed them all, deliberately, utterly, and swore never to build them again. That uprising has a name, and the name has the weight of legend. It is called the Butlerian Jihad. In the deep past of this universe, so the histories say, human beings had surrendered more and more of their thought, their judgment, their very decisions, to intelligent machines. And the machines, or those who controlled them, came to hold humanity in a kind of bondage, a slow, soft servitude in which people stopped thinking for themselves because the machines would do it for them. It was not only that the machines ruled, it was that the human mind, no longer needed, began to wither. People had handed over the one thing that made them human, the labor of thought itself, and in giving it away, they had given away their freedom without ever quite noticing the moment it was gone. And so, there came a great convulsion, a crusade that swept across the worlds, in which humanity turned on its machines and broke them. It was a war of terrible cost, drawn out and bloody, and it left the human race changed forever. When it was over, the survivors wrote into the very center of their new civilization a single commandment, a law placed at the foundation of their holiest book, the Orange Catholic Bible. And the commandment was this, that humanity shall not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind. Not shall not use, not shall not trust, but shall not make. The prohibition reached past the machines themselves to the very act of creating them, to the impulse that had nearly cost the species its soul. To build a thinking machine after the jihad was not merely a crime. It was a blasphemy of the deepest kind, an offense against the hard-won dignity of the human mind. Sit with the strangeness of that for a moment, here in the quiet. We are used to imagining the far future as a place of ever smarter machines, of artificial minds woven into everything, of humanity leaning ever more heavily on its creations. Herbert imagined the opposite. He imagined a future that had gone to the edge of that path, looked over into what waited there, and recoiled, and turned back, and chosen instead to build its whole civilization on the refusal. The Butlerian Jihad is the great no at the root of everything. The moment humanity said that it would rather carry the burden of its own thought, however heavy, than lay it down at the feet of a machine. And everything that comes after, all the strange and marvelous shapes of this universe, grows out of that single ancient refusal. Consider what such a choice would demand. If you tear the thinking machines out of a civilization, you leave behind an enormous emptiness. Someone must still do the vast calculations that hold an interstellar economy together. Someone must still guide the ships across the folded dark between the stars. Someone must still process the oceans of information a great empire generates, still reason through the tangled problems that arise, still remember and analyze and decide. When the machines are gone, all of that work does not vanish. it falls back onto human shoulders. And so the deepest consequence of the Butlerian Jihad was not the absence of machines. It was what humanity had to become in order to live without them. Having refused to build minds in the likeness of their own, they were forced instead to reach into themselves and cultivate powers they had never known they carried. To make of the human being itself the instrument that the machine could no longer be. We will follow that thread more closely in the quiet chapters ahead, into the human computers and the mind-shaped disciplines that rose to fill the emptiness. But hold this evening simply the shape of the refusal itself, and the puzzle it leaves glinting in the dark. For here is where the thread seems to loosen. This is a civilization that has outlawed the thinking machine, that treats the very idea of an artificial mind as the gravest heresy. And yet, it is not a primitive civilization at all. Far from it. It folds space to travel between the stars. It wraps its soldiers in energy shields that turn away any blade moving too fast. It builds aircraft that fly on beating wings across the deserts, the ornithopters, delicate and swift. It carries weapons of terrible power, beams of cutting light, and it keeps, hidden away, the oldest and most dreadful weapons of all, the atomics. This is a universe rich with advanced technology, humming with marvels, and yet it has torn out the one technology we would most expect a far future to depend upon. And so the puzzle stands, and it is a fair one to raise, gently, before we resolve it. Where exactly is the line? If humanity can build ships that fold space, and shields that stop a bullet, and weapons that cut through steel with light, why can it not build a computer to add a column of numbers? What is the difference, in the end, between a forbidden thinking machine and a permitted flying craft, or a permitted shield? Both are complex. Both are made by human hands. Both do things no unaided person could do. How does a civilization draw a line between the machine that is blasphemy and the machine that is merely a tool? And having drawn it, how does it manage to run a galaxy-spanning empire with all its trade and travel and war and record-keeping, without a single computer anywhere to help it think? That is the question we will turn over slowly in the nights to come, and like the puzzles before it, it will not resolve into a mistake. It will open when we look closely into the very meaning of this world. For the line between the forbidden machine and the permitted tool is not really a line about technology at all. It is a line about the human mind, about what may replace it and what may only serve it, and the answer to how the empire runs without computers is one of the most beautiful ideas Herbert ever set down. The idea that when humanity refused to build minds outside itself, it was forced to discover the astonishing minds it had carried within all along. But that unfolding is for another quiet stretch of the night. For now, let the ancient war settle into the dark like a story told long ago and half remembered. Picture the great refusal at the root of everything. Humanity turning back from the edge, choosing the heavy burden of its own thought over the soft servitude of the machine. Picture a whole civilization built upon a single commandment, that no mind shall be made in the likeness of a human mind. And let the puzzle rest lightly on you, unhurried, a thread you have noticed loosen but need not pull tonight. There is time. There is always time in the desert. Let your breathing slow. Let the old war fade and rest. So we come to the strange part, the part that seems to catch when you run your fingers along the weave of this universe. Humanity has torn out its thinking machines. The great commandment stands over everything like a carved stone, the rule against making a machine in the likeness of a human mind. No computers, no artificial brains to add the sums, to steer the ships, to remember for you, to decide. And yet, when you look at the world that Frank Herbert built on top of that emptiness, it does not look primitive at all. It hums with wonders. There are shields that shrug off bullets. There are little aircraft that beat the air with wings like dragonflies and lift heavy cargo over dunes taller than towers. There are lasguns that pour continuous beams of searing light. There are atomics kept in family vaults, weapons that could crack a world. And above all of it, quietly, impossibly, there are starships that fold the distance between suns so that a journey across the galaxy takes no time to the travelers at all. So, you lie there in the dark, and you turn it over gently. And the question rises on its own. How can a people who outlawed the computer still do all of this? Where exactly is the line between the machine they burned and the machine they kept? Think first about the ornithopter, the flying craft they call the thopter. To make wings beat and hold a heavy vessel steady in a rising desert wind is not a simple thing. On the world you know, we lean on small, silent processors to keep an aircraft level, to trim 1,000 tiny corrections every second, to hold the nose true while the gusts try to tip it. That is exactly the kind of ceaseless calculation a computer loves and a human hand struggles with. So, how does a pilot on Arrakis hold a thopter level over a spice field while a worm the length of a cathedral rises beneath him? How does the craft answer him without some hidden mind inside it doing the arithmetic of flight? The story does not stop to explain. It simply lets the thopters fly, graceful and sure, and moves on. Then there is the shield, the Holtzman field, that soft shimmer of protection wrapped around a body or a room or a whole palace. A shield turns away anything that comes at it too fast. A bullet, a thrown spear, a lunging blade at full speed, all of them slide off the invisible skin as if the air itself had thickened into glass. To generate such a field, to shape it, to tune it so that slow things may pass and fast things may not, is a marvel of physics that on your world would demand banks of processors and delicate sensors. Yet a fighting man in the Imperium clips a small generator to his belt and switches it on with a touch and walks into battle wrapped in the impossible. Again, the story asks you to accept it and glide onward. And again, you notice the seam. Where did the mind go that once would have run such a device? The lasgun is stranger still, a weapon of pure light, a beam that can slice through stone and steel, carried by ordinary soldiers. And beyond that, folded away in the deep vaults of the great houses, sit the atomics, the family nuclear arsenals kept under the oldest and most terrible of the Empire's laws. These are not the tools of a fallen people scratching in the ashes of a lost age. These are the tools of a civilization that has kept its hardest sciences and refined them for thousands of years. The forges still burn. The knowledge still flows. Only the thinking machine is gone, and so the puzzle sharpens rather than fades. It would be one thing if banning computers had dragged all of technology down with it, if the whole world had slipped backward into candles and horses. But it did not. The lights stayed on. The ships kept flying. Something must have taken the machine's place, quietly, in the dark, and you begin to wonder what. And then, largest of all, there is the folding of space. This is the thing that makes the whole empire possible, the trick that binds 10,000 worlds into a single order. A great ship of the Spacing Guild does not crawl between the stars across the long, empty centuries. It folds the space between here and there so that the 2 points touch, and it slips across the crease, and it arrives. To fold space is to gamble with the very shape of the universe. A single error, A mountain of rock waiting unseen at the far end of the fold. A star sitting where the ship means to appear, and everything and everyone aboard is simply gone. On your world, you would trust that calculation to the fastest computers ever built. And even then, you would run it 1,000 times to be sure. In the Imperium, there are no such computers to run it. And still the ships fold, voyage after voyage, safe and certain, and the spice flows, and the letters cross the galaxy, and the great houses feud and marry and trade as if distance had been tamed. How? Who does the sum that no machine is allowed to do? This is the loosening thread, and if you pull on it gently in the quiet of the night, the whole tapestry seems to shift. A galaxy runs. Economies balance across countless worlds. The harvest of one planet feeding the tables of another, prices set, cargoes matched to holds, fortunes counted in the trillions. Fleets move. Armies march. Palaces keep their ledgers. All the endless bookkeeping of an empire that spans the stars, and not one thinking machine anywhere to keep the count. It should be like trying to run a great city with every clock and calculator smashed, every record keeper struck blind, and yet somehow the city thrives, cleaner and sharper and more alive than before. That is the shape of the puzzle. Not that the empire is broken, but that it is not broken at all, when by every reasonable measure it ought to be. You could call it a plot hole. You could say Herbert wanted his knights and his spaceships both, his medieval feeling of dukes and blades and sworn oaths laid over a canvas of interstellar travel, and that to have both he simply waved away the contradiction and hoped no one would look too closely. And there is a small truth in that, the way there is always a small truth in the simplest answer. A universe without computers but with folding starships is, on its face, a lovely impossibility. But the softer and stranger truth is that Herbert did look closely, closer than almost anyone, and the thing that looks like a gap he dug on purpose, and he filled it with something you would never expect. He did not leave the space where the machine used to be empty. He filled it with people. That is the answer that waits on the far side of this puzzle, and we will walk toward it slowly, the way you would walk out onto cooling sand under the first stars. For now, let the question simply rest in your mind without weight, the way a small stone rests in an open palm. A world that burned its calculators and kept its starships. A world that forbade the artificial mind and somehow flies farther and reckons finer than any world that kept its machines. It seems, at first, like a mistake left in the fabric, a dropped stitch in a vast and beautiful garment. But hold it lightly and let it turn. Every impossible thing in this empire, the shield and the thopter and the folding ship, is pointing at the same hidden answer, the same quiet solution, the story tucked away where the machine used to be. And when you finally see what it is, the whole will not feel like a flaw at all. It will feel like the whole reason the story exists. Rest here a moment in the not knowing. The answer is close, and it is gentler and grander than you would guess, and it has been standing in plain sight in every ship and every court since the very beginning. And here is where the thread you were pulling loosens all the way, and the puzzle turns in your hand and becomes something whole and beautiful. The empire did not run without minds after it burned the machines. It ran because it grew new minds, human ones, trained and shaped and stretched until they could do the very things the machines had done, and more. When humanity tore down the thinking machine, it did not fill the empty space with silence. It filled the space with people who had learned to think like nothing the world had ever seen. That is the answer that was hiding under the whole puzzle. The ban did not cripple humanity. It forced humanity to become the marvel it had been leaning on machines to be. Consider first the mentat. A mentat is a human being trained from childhood in the deepest arts of thought until his mind can compute the way a machine once computed. He holds vast columns of data in his memory without notes, sifts them, weighs probabilities, follows a chain of causes down through countless branching outcomes, and returns an answer as cold and clean as any processor ever gave. A great house does not keep a computer to plan its wars and count its wealth. It keeps a mentat, a living calculator seated quietly at the duke's side, whose eyes may show the faint red stain of the juice he takes to sharpen the trance, and whose mind moves through numbers the way a swimmer moves through water. Where you would have built a machine, this world built a person, and the person can do something the machine never could. He can judge. He can feel the weight of the answer, sense the lie hidden in the data, know when the cold sum leaves out the one warm thing that changes everything. The mentat is the machine's work carried by a soul, and that difference is the whole point. And notice how a mentat is grown rather than built. He is not switched on in a factory and shipped to his master ready-made. He is raised across long, patient years, taught the disciplines one upon another, his memory trained the way a gardener trains a vine, until the counting and the sifting become as natural to him as breathing. The empire did not lose the machine's gift. It learned to plant that gift in a child and let it ripen into a person. Then think of the guild navigator, and the great riddle of the folding ships answers itself. Nobody runs a computer to plot the safe course through folded space, because the navigator does something a computer never could. A navigator bathes for a lifetime in the concentrated essence of the spice, breathing it, swimming in it, until the melange changes him, warps his body into something no longer quite human, and opens in his mind a limited kind of prescience, a narrow seeing across the threads of what might come. And so, before the ship folds, the navigator looks. He looks down the fold and sees the paths ahead, sees the one that arrives safely and the many that end against a star or a stone. And he chooses the safe one, and he steers the ship along it by the light of his own foresight. No calculation. No arithmetic racing through circuits. A human being seeing the future clearly enough to fly 100,000 souls across the galaxy and set them down whole. The impossible sum that had no machine to solve it is solved by a man who has traded his ordinary shape for the power to see. That is why the ships fly. Not despite the ban, but because of everything the ban made necessary. And then there is the Bene Gesserit, the sisterhood of women who took the discipline of the human body and mind further than anyone thought a body or a mind could go. They control every muscle, every nerve, every beat of the heart. They read the smallest flicker in another person's face and voice and posture and know the truth beneath the words. They can render poison harmless within their own bodies, walk unseen through a crowd, bend another's will with the trained and terrible power of the voice. They carry within them, once awakened, the memories of all their ancestral mothers reaching back through the long dark of history. Where a lesser world might have built machines to sense and to persuade and to remember, this world grew women who could do all of it inside their own skin. The Bene Gesserit are the human mind refusing every limit, the living proof of how far a person can reach when there is no machine left to reach for them. Do you see, now, how the whole becomes a doorway? Herbert did not forget to explain how his galaxy runs without computers. He built the whole galaxy as the answer to that single question. Take away the thinking machine, he asks, and what happens to a species that has leaned on it for so long that it has forgotten what it is? And his answer, worked out across 1,000 pages, is that the species wakes up. Denied the crutch, it learns to walk, and then to run, and then to do things the crutch could never have done. The mentat for calculation, the navigator for the crossing of space, the Bene Gesserit for the mastery of the self, the Fremen, hardened by their desert, for endurance and survival past all reason. Each one a human power grown into the space where a machine used to sit. The ban did not leave a wound. It left a garden, and strange and wonderful things grew there. And underneath all of it runs the warning that Herbert wanted you to carry. The quiet thought at the center of the whole design. The danger, he is saying, was never really the machine itself. The gears and the circuits and the cold, fast reckoning were never the true threat. The threat was what the machine did to the people who used it. When you let a machine think for you, slowly, gently, without any single moment you could point to as the fall, you stop thinking for yourself. You hand over your judgment a little at a time until one day the judgment is gone and you no longer even remember that it was yours to keep. That is the thing the Butlerian Jihad rose against. Not against the metal, but against the surrender. Not against the tool, but against the sleep of the human mind that lets the tool decide. The commandment against making a machine in the likeness of a human mind is really a commandment to keep the human mind awake, to keep it doing its own hard and holy work of thinking and choosing and bearing the weight of what it chooses. So the Empire kept its shields and its lasguns and its thopters and its folding ships because those are only tools, and a tool does not think in your place. And it burned the thinking machine because that machine had learned to think in humanity's place, and humanity had let it. The line that seemed so blurry, the line between the technology they kept and the technology they destroyed, turns out to be drawn with great care after all. On one side, the machine that serves the hand. On the other, the machine that replaces the mind. They kept everything on the first side and destroyed everything on the second, and then they filled the emptiness they had made with the fullest flowering of human ability the story could imagine. Let that settle over you now like a warm blanket in the cool of the desert night. The puzzle that looked like a crack in the world was the foundation stone all along. A people who gave up their machines and discovered in the giving up how vast they themselves could be. There is something to rest on in that. That the answer to what we might lose is so often what we might become. That the empty space where the easy thing used to be is exactly where the true thing has room to grow. Breathe slowly and let the thought loosen and drift. The Empire runs on people, on trained and awakened and fully living minds, and that is not a hole in the story at all. It is the heart of it, beating quietly under the sand, and you can let it carry you gently down towards sleep. Now we come to the young man at the center of it all, and to the gift that is also a wound. The gift of seeing the future. To understand the puzzle that waits ahead, you have to first understand what happened to Paul Atreides. Slowly, the way it happened to him, out on the sand under a sky crowded with stars. Paul was born to two great inheritances he did not ask for. From his father, Duke Leto, he took the training of a ruler and the loyalty of good and faithful men. From his mother, the Lady Jessica, he took the deep disciplines of the Bene Gesserit, the control of body and mind, and something more than that, a hidden thread of ancestry that the sisterhood had been weaving toward for 90 generations. And then his family was betrayed and broken and cast out into the desert of Arrakis, the one world in all the universe where the spice pours up out of the sand, and it was there, soaked in melange, that the gift woke inside him. The spice is the key to it, so let us hold the spice in our minds for a moment. Melange does more than lengthen a life or tint the eyes the deep blue of the desert. In great enough measure, in the right person, it opens a door in the mind that most human beings never even know is there. It loosens the grip of time. It lets awareness spill past the narrow present, past the single moment you are living in, out across the branching paths of what has been and what may yet be. The guild navigators taste a little of this and use it to steer their ships. The Bene Gesserit reach toward it and touch the memories of their mothers. But in Paul the door did not merely open. It was flung wide, wider than in anyone before him, because he was the thing the sisterhood had bred for, the one they called the Kwisatz Haderach, the mind that could bridge every space and stand in the place no other could stand and look in every direction at once. On Arrakis, the spice is not a rare and measured dose. It is in the food and the water and the very air, in every breath the wind carries off the dunes. And so, day by day, the spice worked its slow change in Paul, and the visions came. At first they came like dreams, strange and edged, and too vivid to be ordinary sleep. Images of a girl with eyes like wells of blue whom he had never met. Images of green places and of blood on the sand. Images that troubled him because some of them, impossibly, began to come true. A face he had dreamed would appear before him in the waking world. A cavern he had seen in the night would open in front of his feet. He began to understand that he was not simply dreaming. He was remembering things that had not happened yet. Then came the deeper opening, the one that changed everything. Deep in the desert, taken in by the Fremen, Paul was given the concentrated essence of the spice in a measure that would have killed an ordinary man, and his awareness broke its last banks and flooded out across time. And what he saw there was not a single tidy picture of tomorrow. It was a vast and terrible landscape spread out in every direction, countless futures branching and rebranching like the channels of a river delta seen from very high above, all the things that might come to pass, all the roads the present could still become. He stood at the center of that landscape, and he could look down any of its paths and see where it led. He could see himself old, and see himself dead, and see himself never born at all in the futures that his own choices would erase. It is a thing almost too large for the human mind to hold, and it is a wonder that it did not simply shatter him. In a way, it did shatter something in him, the ordinary young man he might have been, and left in his place someone who could never again be quite at rest, because he could never again not see. And here, threaded through nearly every one of those branching roads, Paul saw a single terrible thing coming toward him. He saw a holy war. He saw his own name become a banner, and armies of desert warriors pouring off Arrakis and out across the galaxy in a fervor of faith, worshipping him, killing in his name, sweeping from world to world in a storm of belief that would leave billions of the dead behind it. The Fremen called this coming storm by their own word for it, and Paul learned to call it that too, the jihad, the wild green fire of a people who had waited 1,000 years for a Messiah and had at last decided that he was the one. He saw it clearly. He saw the burned worlds and the numberless graves and the fanatic love that would build them, and he saw his own face at the center of it, lifted up, worshipped, the reason for all of it. And every part of him recoiled. You must understand how deeply this horrified him, because the whole heart of the story turns on it. Paul was not a cruel young man dreaming of conquest. He was a boy who had lost his father and his home, who wanted justice for his house and safety for his mother, and a life, if he could find it, with the Fremen who had taken him in and with the girl from his visions, who became real and became his beloved. He did not want to be a god. He did not want to be a banner. He looked down the roads of the future and saw the ocean of blood that would be spilled under his name, and it sickened him to the core, and he wanted, more than almost anything, to find some other way, some quiet path through the delta of futures that did not end in that fire. And this is the shape of the gift and the wound together. Paul could see the catastrophe more clearly than any prophet who ever lived, in more detail, from farther off, with more certainty. He could see exactly what was coming and exactly how monstrous it would be. He was not blind to his fate, stumbling toward it in the dark the way the old tragic figures did. He was the opposite of blind. He saw it all, whole and bright and dreadful, laid out before him with time still left to act. Surely, you think, lying there in the soft dark, surely that is the one situation in which a person could save himself and everyone else. Surely to see the disaster coming from so far away is to be able to step aside from it. Surely a man who can look down every road can simply choose a road that does not burn. Hold on to that thought, and hold on to Paul, as we leave him standing at the edge of his terrible new sight. A young man wrapped in the robes of the desert, loved and feared by the fierce people around him, carrying inside his head a map of futures no one else can see. He has the clearest possible view of the storm. He has time. He has power beginning to gather around him. He wants with his whole heart to avoid what he sees. Everything seems to be in his favor. And yet, as we will find when we turn this over slowly, every road he studies, every path he traces with the finger of his mind, keeps curving back toward the same fire. That is the puzzle waiting for us, gentle and strange. For now, simply rest in the wonder of it. A man who can see tomorrow, standing under the desert stars, afraid of what he sees. Let the sand cool. Let the visions blur softly at their edges. There is no need to solve anything yet. There is only the quiet miracle and the quiet dread of a boy who has learned to remember the future and the long question of what such a gift can truly save. So here is the puzzle, laid out softly in the dark, turned over slowly the way you would turn a smooth stone found on a beach. Paul can see the future. He can look down the branching roads of what is to come and watch the holy war gather at the end of nearly all of them, the war he loathes, the war fought in his name that will drown whole worlds in blood. He sees it clearly. He has time. He wants with his whole heart to avoid it. And yet, he cannot. Every path he chooses leads him back toward the fire. And when you lie there and think about it gently, the thread seems to loosen because it does not quite make sense. If a man can truly see the future, why can he not simply choose a better one? What is the use of seeing tomorrow if seeing it does not let you change it? Either the future is fixed, in which case why does he struggle at all? Or the future is free, in which case why does he fail? It cannot, you feel, be both at once. And there, right there, is the knot at the center of the whole book. Turn it one way, and it looks like the deepest kind of mistake a story can make. A prophet who sees the future is either a puppet or a free man. If everything he sees is set in stone, then his choices are theater, a show of struggle over an outcome already decided, and his horror at the coming war is just a role he is made to play on the way to an ending he was always going to reach. But if he is truly free, if his choices matter, then his sight should be a lantern held up over the road ahead. And a man with a lantern does not walk into the pit he can plainly see. So which is it? The story seems to want both. It wants Paul to see, and it wants his seeing to be real, and it wants him to fail anyway. And at first, that feels like wanting to have it every way at once, like a knot tied, so it can never be either loosened or pulled tight. But stay with it, softly, and let the knot begin to turn, because this is not a flaw that Herbert stumbled into. It is the very thing he built the book to explore, the question he cared about more than almost any other, and his answer is stranger and truer than the simple either, or that the puzzle first offers you. The answer begins with what prescience actually is in this world, because it is not what you first imagine. When Paul looks into the future, he does not see one fixed film unspooling toward a single certain end. He sees a landscape. He sees the delta of a great river spread out below him, countless channels branching and rejoining and branching again, all the ways the present might flow toward all the tomorrows it might become. The future is not one road. It is a country of roads. And so, the future is not fixed. It is genuinely open, genuinely full of choices, genuinely his to shape. And yet, and here is the first turn of the knot, the very act of looking changes the country he is looking at. This is the thing that is so easy to miss and so important to hold. Paul is not a distant observer watching a world he has no part in. He is standing inside the landscape he sees. He is one of the rivers. When he looks down a path and chooses it, his choosing closes the others. The way stepping onto one road means your feet are no longer on the rest. The seeing and the doing are tangled together. He cannot look without shaping, and he cannot shape without narrowing, and so every act of foresight is also an act of pruning, cutting away the futures he does not walk into, until fewer and fewer remain. Now put beside that the second thing that traps him, which is not his power at all, but the love and the hunger of the people around him. Paul does not fall into the desert as a stranger and stay one. The Fremen have waited 1,000 years for a Messiah, primed by old-seated legends to recognize a Savior when he comes. And when Paul comes to them with his powers and his mother's voice and his uncanny knowing, they begin to believe. And belief is a force, as real in this story as any shield or blade. The more they believe in him, the more he becomes the thing they believe in. His myth grows around him like a second skin he cannot shed, and with every person who kneels, another door in the future quietly closes. The roads that led away from the holy war ran through a Paul who was still only a man, still able to walk off into obscurity, still able to refuse the crown. But that Paul is being buried day by day under the Paul that the desert worships, and the more he is loved as a god, the fewer human roads remain. So you see how the two halves of the puzzle stop fighting each other. The future is free, truly free, at the beginning, full of paths. And Paul, by the terrible combination of his own sight and other people's faith, watches those free paths close one by one, until only the roads that end in fire are left standing. It is not that the future was fixed all along, and his struggle was theater. It is that his struggle itself, and the worship it draws, and the visions that draw the worship, keep spending the freedom, keep narrowing the delta, until at last the openness he began with has been used up and only the dreadful outcome remains. He is not a puppet on a set string. He is a man in quicksand, and everything he does to climb out presses him deeper, and the more clearly he sees the quicksand, the more certainly his every motion sinks him. This is what Herbert called the terrible purpose, and it is the true and quiet heart of the whole book. Paul can see the catastrophe, and he cannot find a path around it that does not lead somewhere worse. He glimpses, down some of the closing roads, futures even darker than the Holy War, and so at times he chooses the war as the least of the horrors he can still reach, which is a burden almost past bearing, to guide humanity toward a fire, because every other road you can still see burns hotter. And there is the final turn of the knot, the one that makes the puzzle stop being a flaw and become a warning. Herbert did not write Paul as a triumphant hero for you to cheer. He wrote him, in part, as a caution against exactly the kind of savior the desert makes of him. Beware, the book is quietly saying, the charismatic leader who gathers a people's whole faith into himself, because even a good man, even a man who can see the ruin coming, even a man who wants above all things to prevent it, can be carried helpless at the head of the flood he most feared to unleash. To worship a person is to hand them a power that traps them as surely as it traps you. And past Paul, farther down the sand than we will walk tonight, that same terrible logic waits for his son, who will take the burden further onto a long, lonely road that Paul could see but could not bear to walk, the road they call the Golden Path. But that is a story for another quiet night. For now, let the knot rest, loosened in your open hand. The future was free, and the seeing of it and the worship of the seer spent that freedom down to a single dreadful channel. It is not a contradiction after all. It is a trap made of foresight and faith, closing gently around a young man who saw everything and could save no one, least of all himself. Let that settle over you now, soft and sad and strangely peaceful, the way true things often are. There is no path to find tonight, no future to choose. There is only the quiet understanding that even sight has its limits, and the letting go that comes with it as you sink slowly and safely down toward rest. So, we come back to the puzzle we left loosening in the dark, the puzzle of a young man who could see the future and hated what he saw, and yet walked toward it step by patient step, as though his own feet knew a road his heart refused. If Paul Atreides could look down the branching corridors of time, if he could watch the holy war spread from world to world like fire crossing dry grass, then surely, you might think, he could simply turn aside. Surely a man who sees the cliff does not walk off it. And this is the question we now let dissolve, slowly, the way a footprint dissolves in wind-blown sand, until what looked like a flaw in the story becomes instead the deepest and quietest truth inside it. The first thing to understand, as you lie there in the warm dark, is that Paul's gift was never a single fixed picture of what would be. It was not a window looking out on one settled tomorrow. It was more like standing on a high dune at dusk and seeing not one path across the desert, but 10,000 faint paths at once, some bright, some dim, some forking again and again into further paths beyond the edge of sight. Prescience in Dune is not prophecy in the old simple sense. It is the vision of probabilities, a shifting landscape of futures that lean and sway with every choice, every accident, every small act of will. Some futures burned brightly because they were likely. Others flickered like distant candles, possible but faint, reachable only through a narrow gate of exactly the right decisions made in exactly the right order. And here is the strange and beautiful part, the part that turns the whole thing gently on its head. The very act of seeing changed what could be seen. When Paul looked into time, he became part of the thing he was looking at. His awareness rippled outward and altered the water it moved through. A future observed is a future touched. So, he could never simply read the map like a traveler consulting a chart, because the moment he read it, the map redrew itself around his reading. He was not a spectator watching a river flow past. He was a stone dropped into that river, And the ripples of his own knowing spread and crossed and changed the current everywhere at once. To see the future in Dune is to reach into it, and to reach into it is to move it. Now think about what that means for a man who wanted, more than anything, to avoid one particular future. Paul saw the jihad, the fanatical war carried in his name across the stars, the green banners of the Atreides raised over burning worlds, the billions who would die in the fervor of believing in him. He was sickened by it. He called it his terrible purpose, this thing he did not want and could not seem to escape. And so he searched. Night after night, deep in the spice trance, he walked the corridors of possibility, looking for the one path, the single thread among thousands that led somewhere kinder. He looked for the future in which the desert did not drown the galaxy in blood. And what he found, again and again, was that the doorways were closing. They were closing partly because of him. This is the trap at the center of the puzzle, and it is a very human trap, one you might recognize from far smaller lives than his. The more Paul was believed in, the fewer futures remained in which the war did not come. Every miracle the Fremen saw in him, every prophecy he seemed to fulfill, every desperate hope the oppressed poured onto his shoulders, sealed another branch of the tree of time and left only the branches that led toward the flame. He was becoming a myth, and a myth is not a man. A myth has a momentum of its own. A myth cannot say no. Once a whole people decides that you are their promised one, once they have wept and knelt and sharpened their knives in your name, your own choices matter less and less against the vast, slow weight of their belief. The legend rides forward, whether the man beneath it wishes to or not. This is why the future felt to Paul both fixed and free at the same time, and why that seeming contradiction is not a mistake in the telling, but the very engine of the tragedy. In the small, in the moment, he was free. He could choose this word or that, this alliance or the other, this death or that mercy. But every free choice narrowed the field of what remained free afterward. He was free the way a man is free while falling, able to turn his body, able to reach out a hand, but no longer able to be anywhere but falling. The great outcomes had gathered too much weight. Too many people wanted the war. Too many powers had aligned toward it. And the one or two faint threads that might have led elsewhere ran through such darkness, such loss, that Paul could not bring himself to take them, or could not find their beginning in time, or saw that they led to something even worse than the war itself. That was the true horror he carried. It was not that he could not see a way out. It was that every way out he could see cost more than the road he was already on. There is a deep sadness in this, and also a strange mercy, and both are worth turning over slowly as your breathing slows. Paul was not a villain who chose slaughter. He was not a fool who failed to look. He was a young man who looked as hard as any human being has ever looked, who saw the catastrophe coming with perfect clarity, and who discovered that clarity alone does not set you free. Seeing the cliff is not the same as being able to grow wings. He became the most aware man in the universe, and his awareness became his cage. The gift that let him see everything also bound him to the one thing he most wished to undo. And this, in the end, is why Frank Herbert built the puzzle exactly this way. Because it was never really a flaw he failed to notice. It was the warning he most wanted to leave behind. Herbert did not write Dune to give us a shining hero to worship. He wrote it, in large part, as a caution against exactly that impulse, the human hunger to hand our fate to a charismatic leader, a chosen one, a messiah who will carry the weight of our choices so we do not have to. Paul is the mirror held up to that hunger. Look, the story says, gently and without raising its voice, look what happens even to a good man, even to a man who can literally see the future, once a people decides to make him their god. Even he cannot steer the flood. Even he is swept along. The danger is not that our heroes are wicked. The danger is that our worship makes them helpless, and makes us helpless too, and turns a single human being into a force of nature that no one, not even he, can any longer command. So the thread that seemed to loosen does not tear at all when you pull it. It draws the whole cloth tighter. The future that is both seen and unavoidable is not a contradiction the author overlooked. It is the shape of the trap that Herbert wanted you to feel from the inside, the trap of prescience, the trap of myth, the trap of a purpose grown too terrible and too large for any one soul to hold. And far ahead, beyond the pages of the first book, this burden does not vanish. Paul's own son, Leto II, will look down those same corridors of time and choose a path so long and so lonely that it will span thousands of years, a path called the Golden Path, taken precisely because someone had to carry what Paul could not. But that is a story for another night. For now, let this one settle. The prophet who could not escape his prophecy was never a hole in the story. He was its beating, sorrowful heart. And now we come to the fifth and final puzzle of the night, and it may be the quietest of them all, because it hides in plain sight the way a whole people hid in plain sight, out in the empty places of a planet that everyone thought they understood. This is the puzzle of the Fremen, the desert people of Arrakis, and of the vast secret they kept from the most powerful empire that has ever existed. So settle in, let your shoulders grow heavy, and let us walk out slowly onto the sand to see what the rulers of the galaxy somehow never saw. To feel the weight of the puzzle, you first have to understand what the great powers believed. When the Padishah Emperor and the noble houses looked at Arrakis, they did not see a home. They saw a hazard and a treasure in one, a furnace of a world worth crossing the galaxy for, only because of the spice buried in its sands. To them, Arrakis was a mine, not a country. It was a place you endured in order to grow rich, a place of blistering days and freezing nights, of storms that could strip flesh from bone, of a horizon of dunes stretching on with nothing in it worth counting. And when they thought of the native people, the ones who somehow lived out there in that killing heat, they thought of them the way careless landlords think of the weeds at the edge of a field. A scattering, a remnant, a few thousand ragged wanderers clinging to the fringes of the settled towns, useful perhaps as cheap labor, dangerous perhaps in small raiding bands, but nothing that could ever matter to the fate of an empire. That was the belief. That was the comfortable, arrogant, wildly mistaken belief. The truth waited out beyond the last maps, in the deep desert where the great worms ruled and no outsider dared to go. The truth was that Arrakis held not a few scattered wanderers, but millions upon millions of Fremen, a hidden civilization hardened by the harshest world in the known universe into something the Empire could not even imagine. They did not cling to the fringes. They ruled the vastness that the Empire had written off as empty. In hidden caverns dug deep into rock, in the sheltered communities they called sietches, they lived and loved and raised their children and buried their dead, generation after generation, entirely unseen by the men who believed they owned the planet. And they were not soft. Consider what it takes simply to survive in a place like that, and you begin to understand the kind of people the desert had made. Every drop of water was sacred to them, so sacred that they wore suits of their own devising. The still suits, garments that captured the moisture of the body, the sweat and the breath and every other loss, and reclaimed it, filtered it, gave it back clean to be drunk again. A person could walk for days across the open sand in one of those suits and lose almost nothing. They had learned to read the desert the way a sailor reads the sea, to know the coming of a storm by the taste of the air, to move without rhythm, so that the great worms would not feel their footsteps and rise. They had turned the most lethal environment human beings have ever inhabited into a home so well fitted to them that the very things that killed outsiders became, for the Fremen, tools and shields and quiet allies. They kept their numbers hidden with a discipline that ran all the way down into the smallest habits of daily life. A Fremen did not speak of the true count of the sea etches. A Fremen did not lead a stranger into the deep. When one of their own fell in battle or in age, the body was not simply laid to rest, because in that world the water of the body belonged to the tribe, and so even in grief they reclaimed it, drawing the moisture back to be shared among the living. Nothing was wasted, and nothing was revealed. To the Empire's spies and soldiers, the desert seemed to swallow people without a trace. And it did, but not in the way the outsiders assumed. What the desert swallowed, the Fremen gathered up in secret. Every lost traveler, every ill-fated patrol that wandered too far, simply vanished, and the vanishing itself became part of the great concealment. They were fighters too, though the Empire did not truly know it. Out there in the Syaches were warriors so fierce that a single small band of them, when finally tested, would prove worth many times their number of the Empire's own trained soldiers. They had no need of the elaborate machinery of galactic war. They had knives and patience and an intimate knowledge of the ground, and above all they had a fearlessness bred into them by a life in which death was always one mistake away. They did not fear the desert because the desert was their mother. They did not fear hardship because hardship was the only world they had ever known. And so a people the Empire dismissed as background, as scenery, as the least important element on a planet valued only for its dust, were in fact one of the most formidable fighting forces the universe had ever unknowingly harbored. Think, too, of the strangest of their arts, the one that would have seemed pure fable to any noble sitting safe in a distant palace. The great worms of Arrakis were the terror of every outsider, vast beyond reckoning, drawn by the smallest steady rhythm of movement across the sand, able to rise and swallow a machine whole. To the Empire they were a wall, the reason the deep desert could not be crossed, the living proof that the far dunes were forbidden ground. And the Fremen, quietly, across long generations of courage and ritual and hard-won craft, had learned to make those very monsters their servants. They had learned to summon a worm from the depths, to climb its enormous flank as it surged past, to hold it and turn it and ride it across the open sand at speed. The creatures that made the deep desert a death sentence for everyone else were, for the Fremen, the roads of a hidden country, the swift and terrible steeds of a people who had befriended the one thing the whole galaxy feared. It is hard even to picture it, a rider small as a grain of dust, perched atop a living mountain of the desert, moving where no outsider could follow. And yet it was as ordinary to them as walking. There is one more thing they hid, and it may be the most astonishing of all, because it was not a weapon and not an army, but a dream. Deep in the Syaches, passed quietly from parent to child across the years, the Fremen carried a secret hope for their scorched and thirsty world. They dreamed of water. Not the small stolen drops of the stillsuit, but water in the open, water enough to change the face of Arrakis itself, to soften its cruelty, to turn stretches of the killing sand into places where things could grow green and live. This dream had been given a shape and a plan by an outsider who had come to love the desert people, the planetologist known to the Empire as an imperial servant, but known to the Fremen as something closer to a prophet of the land, and by his father before him. Together and across the years, they had sketched a patient, centuries-long design to bring life back to a dead world, a slow ecological transformation that the Fremen took into their hearts as a sacred promise for their distant grandchildren. So imagine the true picture of Arrakis, the one the Empire never saw. Beneath the surface that the rulers dismissed as empty, there lived millions of disciplined, hardened, secret people, hoarding water in hidden reserves, mastering the desert down to its smallest cruelties, raising fighters of a caliber no noble house suspected, and cradling all the while a dream of remaking their whole world into a garden. All of it invisible. All of it out past the edge of the maps. All of it moving quietly toward a future the powerful could not conceive, precisely because they had never bothered to look. That is the shape of the puzzle we will hold tonight, and you can already feel how strange it is. How could this be? How could the empire that folded space and ruled 10,000 worlds, the empire that stationed soldiers on Arrakis and pulled fortunes from its sands and studied it, in its way, with all the cold attention that greed can muster, how could that empire fail to notice a hidden nation living right beneath its feet? How could no one count the millions, or find the water, or learn that these people rode the very worms that everyone else fled? That is the thread we will pull gently in the chapters ahead, and like the others, it will not tear. It will lead us somewhere deeper. But for now, simply rest with the wonder of it, the whole hidden world breathing softly in the dark, waiting, unseen, beneath the indifferent gaze of kings. Let us stay a while with the strangeness of it, turning it over slowly the way you might turn a smooth stone in your hand in the dark. Because the more closely you look at this fifth puzzle, the stranger it becomes. An empire that spanned the stars, that had ruled Arrakis not for a season or a year, but for generations, that wanted from that planet the single most precious thing in all creation, somehow never learned the most basic truths about the world it was bleeding dry. It did not know how many people lived there. It did not know where their water was. It did not know that they could ride the great worms across the open sand as easily as another people might ride horses across a meadow. 3 enormous secrets, kept whole and unbroken, right in the middle of the most watched, most fought over planet in the galaxy. Let us take each of them in turn and simply sit with how impossible it seems. Begin with the numbers, because the numbers are the heart of it. The Harkonnens, who held Arrakis before the Atreides came, were not gentle rulers and not lazy ones. They were cruel, calculating, and endlessly greedy, the kind of masters who counted everything they could put a price on. And yet, their estimates of the native population were wrong, not by a little, but by an almost unimaginable margin. They believed the desert held a scattered few, a modest remnant of wanderers, and they governed on that belief, planned on it, built their whole sense of the planet's danger around it. The truth was millions. Not thousands mistaken for hundreds, not tens of thousands mistaken for thousands, but a vast hidden nation mistaken for a handful of stragglers. Think of how large an error that is. It is not the kind of mistake a careful accountant makes. It is the kind of mistake you make when you have decided in advance that the thing you are counting does not really matter, and so you never count it at all. How does a ruling power, obsessed with control, simply overlook the majority of the people it rules? Then there is the water, and the water is stranger still, because on Arrakis water was not a background comfort, but the very center of all value, more prized in daily life than the spice itself. On a world where a single tear was a thing of astonishment, where the moisture of the dead was gathered and shared, where wealth itself could be measured in the water a person carried, the Fremen had done something almost beyond belief. In hidden basins deep beneath the rock, patiently, over many long years, they had gathered and stored water in enormous reserves, vast quiet pools laid away in secret against a future no outsider knew they were planning for. Enough water to change a world someday. And the Empire, thirsty in its own way for every advantage Arrakis could give, never found it. The planet was surveyed. The planet was mined. The planet was crossed and recrossed by those hunting the spice, and beneath all that traffic lay horde after hidden horde of the one substance that world worshipped, undiscovered, undisturbed, quietly waiting. How do you rule a desert for generations and never stumble onto its hidden seas? And then, strangest of all to outside eyes, there is the matter of the worms. The great sandworms of Arrakis were the terror of the deep desert, creatures so vast that the largest of them could rise longer than the grandest of the Empire's ships, drawn by rhythm and movement, able to swallow a crawler and its crew and the sand beneath them in a single monstrous surge. Every outsider who set foot on the open sand did so in dread of the worms. They were the reason the deep desert was thought unusable, the reason the maps went blank past a certain line, the reason the harvesting of spice was a nervous, watchful, always fleeing kind of work. To the Empire, the worm was a wall, an absolute barrier, the god of a wasteland no sane person entered, and the Fremen, quietly, had turned that god into a mount. They had learned, through courage and ritual and generations of hard-won craft, to call a worm, to climb its vast flank, to hold it and turn it and ride it across the dunes at speed, using the very thing that everyone else fled as the roads of their hidden country. The worms that made the deep desert impassable for the Empire made it a highway for the Fremen, and the Empire never even suspected it was possible. How do you not notice that the monsters at the edge of your map have been tamed into steeds? So there we have the full shape of the impossibility, and it is worth naming plainly so it can settle into you before we begin, in the chapters ahead, to let it dissolve. A galactic power, with soldiers on the ground and centuries of presence and every reason in the universe to understand Arrakis completely, failed to see the number of its people, failed to find their water, and failed to imagine their mastery of the very creatures that defined the planet's terror. Each of these alone would be a remarkable oversight. All three together, kept secret across all those years, can start to feel less like an oversight and more like a hole in the story itself. A place where the fabric seems too thin to hold, where you want to ask whether anyone was paying attention at all. And yet, as you lie there, letting the question widen, notice that a small answer is already beginning to stir inside the puzzle, the way a shape begins to appear in the dark once your eyes have had time to adjust. Notice that all three secrets share a single quality. They were all kept in the one place the Empire refused to go. The people were hidden in the deep desert. The water was stored in the deep desert. The worm riding happened in the deep desert. Every secret lived on the far side of that blank line on the map, out past the reach of the crawlers and the patrols, out in the killing emptiness that the rulers had already decided was worthless and lethal and beneath their notice. The Empire did not fail to search a place it was searching. It failed to search a place it had chosen never to enter. And a people clever enough to see that, a people who understood exactly which stretches of their world the powerful would always avoid, had found the one hiding place large enough to conceal a nation. Consider, too, how long this blindness lasted, because the length of it is part of what makes the puzzle press so hard on the mind. This was not a secret kept for a single season, or through the confusion of some brief and chaotic occupation. The Empire and its servants held Arrakis across generations, long enough for children to be born and grow old and die under their rule, long enough to build cities and refineries and whole industries around the harvest of the spice, long enough to learn every trick of that trade down to its smallest detail. All that time, all those patient years of presence and study and control, and still the great truths of the planet stayed hidden. It is one thing to miss a secret in a hurry. It is another thing entirely to walk past it, day after day, decade after decade, and never once turn your head. And the more you sit with that span of time, the more the ordinary explanations begin to fail, and the more you feel that something deeper must be at work, something about the very way the powerful looked at the world beneath their feet. There is something almost gentle in realizing this, something that lets the tension in the puzzle begin to ease. The Fremen were not invisible by magic. They were invisible by geography and by patience and by the willful blindness of their masters. They lived in the space the Empire had thrown away. And that is a very old truth, one that reaches far beyond any story of sand and spice. The things the powerful cannot see are so often the things they have already decided are not worth looking at. Whole worlds can hide in the places our arrogance tells us are empty. So hold that thought lightly as your breathing slows. The thought of a nation living safe and secret in the very ground its rulers walked across and never truly saw. In the chapter to come, we will follow this thread all the way down into the reasons the desert stayed unmapped, the reasons the Empire looked away, and the quiet dream that was growing all the while beneath the sand. For now, let the wonder of it carry you softly towards sleep. So now, in the soft hours of the night, let us take the last of the 5 puzzles and let it dissolve the way the others have, gently, without argument, until the thread that seemed to loosen draws the whole story tighter than before. The question was how a galaxy-spanning empire could rule Arrakis for generations and never discover the millions of Fremen, never find their hidden water, never learn that they rode the great worms. And the answer, when you follow it all the way down, is not a single clever trick. It is a weaving together of several quiet truths, and each one is worth turning over slowly as your breathing grows deep and even. The first truth is the desert itself. We speak of it easily, as a setting, a backdrop of sand, but to truly understand the puzzle you have to feel how lethal that deep desert was to anyone who did not belong to it. Past the last outposts, out where the great dunes rolled on beyond the reach of the crawlers, the open sand was very nearly a death sentence for an outsider. The heat alone could kill. The storms could rise with a fury that stripped paint from metal and metal from bone. Winds that reached speeds no unshielded traveler could survive. That scoured the land and rewrote the dunes and erased any track laid down before them. And moving through all of it, drawn by the smallest steady rhythm, came the worms, ready to rise beneath anything that walked or rolled across the open sand for long. To the Empire, the deep desert was not a frontier to be explored. It was a furnace with monsters in it. And so the maps simply stopped. Past a certain line, the charts went blank, not because no one wondered what lay out there, but because everyone who tried to find out did not come back. You cannot survey what kills your surveyors. You cannot count what lives in a place your people cannot enter. The desert kept the Fremen's secret, because the desert killed the ones who came looking. The second truth is what the Fremen themselves did to guard that secret, and it was a discipline so complete that it turned even their grief into concealment. When an outsider vanished in the deep desert, the Empire assumed the desert had simply taken him, and in a sense it had, but not blindly. The Fremen killed intruders who came too close to the Sietches, and then they did something that hid the killing entirely. They took the water of the body, as their custom demanded, drawing every drop of moisture from the dead to be shared among the living, and what was left they gave back to the sand, and the sand and the storms did the rest. No bodies, no wreckage, no evidence. A patrol that wandered too far did not leave behind a scene to be found and understood. It left behind nothing at all, only another blank space on a map already full of blank spaces. Another disappearance folded into a desert that seemed to swallow people as a matter of course. And because the Empire already believed the deep desert was empty and deadly, every vanishing simply confirmed what it already thought, rather than raising the alarm it should have raised. The Fremen made their own invisibility, drop by drop, silence by silence, and the Empire helped them do it by refusing to be surprised. But the deepest truth, the one that holds all the others together, is not about the desert or even about Fremen discipline. It is about arrogance and about the particular blindness that great wealth and great power breed in those who hold them. The Empire looked at Arrakis and saw one thing, and one thing only. It saw spice. The whole meaning of that planet, in the minds of the Emperor and the noble houses and the greedy men who ran the harvest, was the precious substance in its sands, and everything else about the world was reduced to a backdrop for that single obsession. The people were not a nation to be understood. They were an obstacle, or a labor supply, or a nuisance, background figures shuffling at the edges of the thing that actually mattered. When you have decided that a world is a mine, you do not study its inhabitants as a civilization. You do not wonder about their dreams or their numbers or their secret arts. You count what you can sell, and you ignore the rest. And so the very greed that drove the Empire to Arrakis was the greed that blinded it to the truth of Arrakis. The spice obsession was a kind of narrowing of the eyes, a focus so tight on one glittering thing that everything around it fell into shadow. The rulers could not see the Fremen because they were not really looking at the Fremen. They were looking always and only at the sand and what it hid, and never at the people who had made that sand their home. And underneath all of it, quiet as an underground stream, ran the dream that gave the hidden people their patience and their purpose. For the Fremen were not merely surviving in secret, they were building towards something. The planetologist who had come to love them, and his father before him, had given them a vision of what their world could someday become, a slow and sacred plan to bring water and life back to Arrakis across the long generations, to turn the killing desert over centuries into something green and living and kind. This was not a war plan. It was an ecological dream, a promise made to grandchildren not yet born, and the Fremen carried it in their hearts with a devotion deeper than any loyalty to emperor or house. They stored their water not out of simple thrift, but as a sacred deposit toward that green future. They endured the desert not as prisoners of it, but as its faithful gardeners in waiting. And that quiet dream, running beneath all the loud politics of thrones and spice and betrayal, is the true countercurrent of the whole story, the patient hope of the powerless flowing on beneath the noise of the powerful. Now see how all of it comes together. and how the whole becomes a doorway. A lethal, unmapped desert that hid a people. A discipline so complete that even the dead left no trace. An arrogance so deep that the rulers never thought to look. And beneath it all, a dream that gave a hidden nation the patience to wait. These are the reasons the millions went uncounted, and once you see them together, the impossibility softens into something that feels almost inevitable. Of course, the Empire did not see them. The Empire had trained itself over generations in exactly the habits of mind that would keep it from seeing. And this is why the underestimation is not a flaw in the story, but the very hinge on which the story turns. Because it was precisely this hidden strength, this uncounted army of the hardest fighters in the universe, that a certain young exile would find waiting for him when he fell out of the sky into the desert, with nothing left but his mother and his name. The Fremen the Empire threw away became the force that toppled the Empire. The people no one bothered to count became the ones who changed the fate of the galaxy. And Paul Atreides did not create that power. He inherited it, this weapon the arrogant had hidden from themselves. This nation waiting in the deep for someone to see what their masters never could. So let this last puzzle settle into the sand with all the others. The hidden Fremen were never a gap the author forgot to close. They were the underdog engine of the whole great turning, the quiet proof that the powerful are blindest to exactly the things that will one day undo them, and that a dream carried faithfully in the dark can outlast every empire that never troubled to look for it. Rest now with that thought. The vast desert breathing softly under the stars, a whole hidden people dreaming of green, and the long, slow patience of those who wait, unseen, for their moment to arrive. There is a strange quiet at the heart of every battle in this universe, and tonight we can rest inside that quiet and turn it over slowly. The way you might turn a smooth stone in your hand before sleep. For all the vastness of the Imperium, for all its folded space, and its worlds beyond counting, when two people finally come to blows, they do not reach for the brightest weapon or the fastest. They reach, instead, for a blade. They come close. They move slowly and with great care. And this is one of the softest puzzles in all of Dune, a thing that seems at first like a mistake, and then, when you look longer, becomes one of the most beautiful choices Frank Herbert ever made. Let us begin with the shield, the little field of protection that so many people carry in this world. The shield is a Holtzman device, named after the same deep science that lets ships fold the distance between stars. When it is switched on, it wraps the body in a shimmer, a faint distortion in the air, a bending of light around the one it guards, and the shield has a single patient rule. It will turn away anything that comes at it quickly. A thrown spear, a swung sword driven with full speed, a bullet, a fast blow of any kind, all of these are caught and stopped by the field, held off as if the air itself had grown thick and unwilling. But a thing that moves slowly, gently, almost tenderly, will pass straight through. The shield lets the slow blade in. Sit with that for a moment, because it is such a gentle inversion of everything you might expect. In our own world, speed is the whole point of a weapon. The faster the strike, the deadlier it is. But here, in the world of the shield, speed is exactly what saves your enemy. The fast blow is wasted. Only the slow, deliberate, almost loving approach of the blade can reach the skin. And so the warriors of this universe learn a strange and ancient discipline. They learn to be quick in the body and slow in the hand. They learn the timing of the slow thrust, the patient press of the point, the moment when a knife can be eased through the shimmer and into the space beyond. Combat becomes a kind of dance, close and deliberate, two bodies almost touching, the whole roaring machinery of a galactic empire narrowing down to the width of a single blade. Now the second half of this puzzle, the part that seems, at first, to break everything. In a universe with folded space and vast atomics, humanity of course possesses the lasgun, a weapon of pure coherent light, a beam that can cut through almost anything. Against ordinary armor, against stone, against metal, the lasgun is terribly effective. And so you might ask, quite reasonably, if there is a beam of light that cuts through nearly everything, why does anyone bother with shields at all? Why not simply burn away every enemy from a safe distance and be done with it? Why return to the intimacy of the knife when you could stand far off and reach out with light? Here is where the puzzle turns and where it grows quietly frightening. When a lasgun beam touches an active Holtzman shield, the two energies meet in a way that neither was meant to survive. The interaction does not simply cancel out, and it does not simply pass through. Instead, the meeting of beam and field produces an explosion, a release of energy on the scale of atomics. A blast that does not care which side fired the shot. The one who pulled the trigger and the one who wore the shield are both consumed. Sometimes the explosion is small and sometimes it is enormous, and no one can reliably say in advance which it will be. The reaction is unpredictable, and its unpredictability is the whole of its terror. You cannot fire a lasgun at a shielded enemy and expect to survive. You may be killing yourself as surely as your target. You may be lighting a fire that swallows you both. And so the lasgun, that magnificent weapon of light, becomes a thing to be used with the greatest caution. It is deadly against the unshielded, against machines and walls and the poor souls who wear no field. But turn it against a shielded foe, and it becomes a suicide pact, a mutual undoing that no careful commander wants. The risk runs in both directions at once. The shield wearer might die, yes, but so might the one who fires, and so might everyone standing near either of them. It is a weapon that answers a shield by killing the whole conversation. Herbert made the counter to the shield too dangerous to reach for, and in doing so he quietly closed the door on distant war. What is left when the light is too dangerous and the shield turns away all speed? What is left is the blade. What is left is the body. What is left is the slow, patient, close, human way of fighting that our own ancestors would have understood without a single word of explanation. The knife returns. The sword returns. The trained hand and the trained eye return. And with them returns something even older, the crysknife of the Fremen, carved from the tooth of the great sandworm, milk-white and slightly curved, a weapon that in the deep desert is treated as almost sacred. In the sietches of Arrakis they say, a crysknife, once drawn, must taste something before it is put away, and whether that is only a saying or a true custom, it tells you how close and how personal war has become. It is not a button pressed from far away. It is a thing done with the whole body, near enough to feel the other person breathe. You can feel, in this, one of the deep pleasures of the world Herbert built. He took a future of unthinkable power, a civilization that could throw its ships across the darkness between stars, and he handed its soldiers knives. He made warfare intimate again. He made it slow. He made it a matter of nerve and skill and the terrible closeness of two living people, rather than a matter of who could press a trigger first from the greatest distance. The great houses could burn a planet with atomics if they truly wished, but the everyday work of violence, the duels and the raids and the guardings, all of it came back down to the edge of a blade, and the courage to close the distance. There is something almost tender in that, something that makes the fighting feel less like erasure and more like an encounter. And this is why the puzzle is not truly a whole at all. When you first meet it, you might think Herbert simply forgot how dangerous a laser ought to be, or that he could not decide whether his future was advanced or primitive. But look again, and you see the design. The shield stops the fast and admits the slow. The lasgun answers the shield only by destroying everyone involved. And out of those two rules, so simple you could hold them both in one drowsy thought, comes an entire civilization of close and careful war. The technology did not make battle impersonal. It made it personal again. It reached forward into the far future and returned combat to the oldest form we know. Two people, a blade, and the narrow space between them. So let this one settle softly as you drift. Imagine the shimmer of a shield in dim light, the way it bends the glow of a lamp. Imagine a warrior who has learned to be patient with a knife, whose whole art is the slow approach that speed cannot achieve. Imagine a weapon of pure light that no one dares to fire because it might swallow the one who wields it. And imagine, at the center of the greatest empire ever dreamed, two people standing close, moving carefully, the vast machinery of the stars gone silent around them, everything reduced to the width of a blade and the quiet courage it takes to cross the last small distance. It is not a mistake in the story. It is the story remembering that war, in the end, has always been a thing done by hands. Now let your thoughts rise up off the surface of Arrakis and out into the great dark between the worlds, into the place where the real power of this universe quietly lives. And let us turn over the softest and strangest puzzle of them all. For in all the vast politics of the Imperium, in all the scheming of great houses and the plots of the Emperor, and the endless hunger for spice, there is one power that towers above every other, one hand that could, at any moment, close around the throat of every planet and squeeze. And yet that hand almost never closes. That power sits still. It holds the whole civilization in its grasp and chooses, again and again, to do nothing with it. This is the puzzle of the Spacing Guild, and it is a lovely thing to fall asleep inside. Begin with the simple fact of travel. In this universe, the distances between stars are so vast that ordinary movement is meaningless. To cross them, a ship must fold space, must bend the fabric of the universe so that two far places briefly touch and slip through the fold before it closes. It is a thing of staggering danger, because to fold space blindly is to risk arriving inside a star, or a planet, or nowhere at all. And so every ship that travels between the worlds must be guided, and only one kind of pilot can guide it safely. Only a guild navigator, floating in a sealed tank of orange spice gas, breathing melange until his body has changed and his mind has opened onto the near future, can look ahead through the fold and choose the path that does not end in death. No navigator, no travel. No travel, no empire. And every navigator belongs to the guild. Sit with the enormity of that. The guild does not merely carry passengers. The guild is the only road between every world in the human universe. Trade, war, migration, the movement of soldiers, the shipment of food, the visits of one great house to another, the reach of the emperor himself, all of it must pass through guild ships and guild navigators. Nothing crosses the dark without them. This means the guild holds a power so total that it is almost hard to picture. If the guild simply refused to carry an army, that army could never reach its enemy. If the guild refused to serve a rebellious planet, that planet would be cut off from all of humanity, left to wither alone in its little pocket of space. The Guild could isolate any world, strand any fleet, unmake any campaign, all by doing nothing more than declining to fly. It is the closest thing this universe has to a hand upon every throat at once. And here is the puzzle. A power that great ought to rule. If you held the only road between all the worlds, would you not simply take the crown? Would you not name yourself master of the human race and let no one lift a finger against you, since no one could even reach you without your leave? The Guild could, in a single decision, become the government of everything. It could dictate to the Emperor, humble the great houses, rewrite the order of the cosmos to its own liking. And yet, it does not. It stays in the background. It keeps its silence. It carries whoever pays and asks few questions, and almost never reaches openly for the throne it could so easily seize. For a power so absolute, the Guild is astonishingly, maddeningly passive. Why? Why does the entity that could rule everything choose, over and over, to remain a servant? The answer is the same grain of sand that lies beneath every other puzzle in this story, and it is a quiet and almost sorrowful thing. The Guild is not free. The Guild is trapped. For the navigators who make all that travel possible do not simply use spice. They are made of it, remade by it, bound to it in body and mind. They breathe melange every hour of their long, strange lives. They cannot fold space without it, cannot see the path ahead without it, cannot even survive without it. Their prescience, their guidance, their whole reason for being, all of it flows from the spice. And the spice flows from one place only, the desert of Arrakis, the single world where the sandworms make it. The Guild holds the only road between the stars, yes. But Arrakis holds the only road inside the Guild. The masters of all travel are themselves addicts, and their supply comes from a planet they do not control. And so the great puzzle dissolves into something gentle and human. The Guild dares not close its hand around the universe, because whoever holds Arrakis holds the Guild. If the Guild made itself the enemy of everyone, if it reached for open rule and provoked the whole Imperium against it, then the spice might stop, and if the spice stopped, the navigators would go blind and die, and the ships would fall silent, and the Guild would perish first and most completely of all. Their monopoly on travel is real, but it rests upon another monopoly they cannot break, the monopoly of the sand. They are strong enough to strangle any single world, and far too dependent to be trusted with the whole. So, they choose safety over dominion. They keep the roads open, take their payment, protect their secret needs, and let others wear the crown and take the risks. Theirs is a power that dares not use itself, because to use it fully would be to reveal how fragile it truly is. There is one more strand woven through all of this, and it is the strand of money, the great trading combine known as COMPILATION. Nearly every great house holds shares in this vast company, and its wealth flows, above all, from the spice. To sit upon the imperial throne is, in large part, to control the largest block of those shares, and to control the spice is to control the value that fills them. So you begin to see the shape of the whole arrangement, the way three great powers lean against one another and none can stand alone. The Emperor holds the throne and the terrible soldiers who guard it. The great houses hold their fleets and their fortunes and their shares. The Guild holds the roads between the stars. And every one of them, every single one, depends utterly on a fine cinnamon dust that comes from one dying hot desert at the edge of everything. The Emperor needs the spice to keep the houses in line. The houses need the spice to keep their wealth. The guild needs the spice simply to breathe. And so all of them, for all their power, circle the same small planet like moths around a single flame, none of them able to smother it without dying in the dark. This is why the passivity of the guild is not a flaw in the story, but one of its quiet triumphs. Herbert built a universe in which the mightiest power is also the most dependent, in which the hand that could crush everything is itself held fast by a need it cannot escape. It is a truth we know in our own smaller lives that the things we most rely upon can quietly come to rule us, that a great strength built upon a single need is a strength that must always tread softly. The guild could rule the stars and chooses instead to serve them, because to reach for everything would be to lose the one thing it cannot live without. So let this one drift away with you now. Picture the sealed ships crossing the dark, guided by strange folded minds that breathe orange gas and see a little way into tomorrow. Picture all the crowns and fortunes and armies of the human race, and beneath them all a single desert, and beneath the desert the worms, and inside the worms the spice that holds the whole vast civilization gently, helplessly, in place, power that dares not use itself. A universe balanced upon a need. It is a soft and steadying thought, and a fine one to carry down into rest. We have wandered a long way tonight, through deserts and breeding halls and folded space, through the minds of prophets and the tanks of navigators. And now, near the end, it is time to gather all of it up gently, the way you might gather a handful of warm sand and let it run slowly through your fingers. We came looking for holes. We came to find the places where this great story seems to loosen and fray, where a thread pulls and the whole fabric appears about to unravel. And we found them. 5 of them. 5 puzzles that seem, on first waking, like mistakes a careful author should never have left behind. But something quiet has happened as we turned each one over. Every hole, when we looked long enough, stopped being a gap and became a doorway. And tonight, in this drowsy gathering in, we can see at last why that kept happening, and why it was never an accident. Consider the first puzzle again, softly, the spice that the whole universe needs, found on one single planet, never synthesized, never moved, never freed from its desert. It seemed impossible that a galaxy could rest so much weight on one grain of sand. But that impossibility is the very thing that makes Arrakis the center of everything. Take it away, let spice grow on 1,000 worlds, and Arrakis becomes nothing. A dry rock no one would fight for, and the whole story simply dissolves. The single planet spice is not a flaw in the design. It is the design. It is the pin upon which the entire wheel of the story turns, the reason emperors and houses and guilds all circle one desert, the reason a boy who learns that desert can rise to shake the stars. Remove the impossibility, and you remove the story. And the second puzzle, the chosen one who came too soon. 90 generations of patient breeding, and then one woman, out of love, undoes it all and fulfills it all in the same breath, bearing a son when she was told to bear a daughter. It seemed absurd that so vast a plan should hinge on a single act of the heart. But that is exactly the point Herbert wished to make, and it is why the puzzle had to be shaped just so. The Bene Gesserit wanted a chosen one they could hold on a leash, a messiah calibrated and controlled. What they got instead was a chosen one born of love, early and free and beyond their reach, which was precisely their oldest fear. The fragility of the plan is the whole meaning of the plan. It says that love is the one variable a cold calculation can never fully own, that the human heart will always slip the leash, and that the most careful design in the universe can be overturned by one person choosing tenderness over obedience. Make the plan unbreakable, and you lose that truth entirely. The third puzzle, the galaxy that outlawed its own machines and then filled itself with wonders. No thinking computers, yet shields and folding ships and weapons of light. It seemed a contradiction, a future that could not decide whether it was advanced or ancient. But the ban on thinking machines is what forced humanity to turn inward and grow its own hidden powers. To make mentats who compute like machines and navigators who see the path ahead, and sisters who master body and mind down to the smallest cell. The forbidden machine is what created the extraordinary human, and beneath it lies Herbert's warning that the true danger was never the machine itself, but the surrender of human thought to it, the quiet handing over of judgment to something outside ourselves. Take away the ban, and you take away the reason these people became so much more than we are. The contradiction is the crucible. The fourth puzzle, the prophet who sees the future, hates what he sees, and walks straight into it anyway. He foresees a holy war carried across the stars in his name, and he is horrified, and still every path leads him there. It seemed a broken kind of prophecy, a power that cannot even save its own wielder. But this is the deepest doorway of them all. The future Paul sees is not a single fixed road, but a branching landscape of possibilities, and the very act of seeing changes what can be seen, and the more he is worshipped, the fewer branches remain that do not end in fire. His prescience does not free him. It traps him inside his own myth. And that trap is the warning at the very heart of the book, the warning against charismatic messiahs and the terrible momentum of the crowds that follow them. If Paul could simply see the future and pick a kinder one, the warning would vanish and the story would become a fairy tale. The failure of his sight is the whole moral of his story. And the fifth puzzle, the millions of hidden Fremen the Empire never counted. A galactic power ruling Arrakis for decades, and yet never learning the true numbers of the people, the hoarded water, the riding of the worms, the green dream buried in the deep desert. It seemed impossible that anyone could overlook so much. But the overlooking is the engine of the entire revolution. The desert was lethal and unmapped. The Fremen hid their dead and reclaimed their water and killed the few who intruded, and above all the rulers were blinded by their hunger for spice, so busy counting profit that they never bothered to count people. Their arrogance made the Fremen invisible, and that invisibility is precisely what lets a hidden army become the most formidable force in the universe the moment a leader finally sees them for what they are. The underestimation is not a lapse in the plot. It is the plot, the whole slow reversal of the mighty and the overlooked. Do you feel the pattern now, gathering as you drift? 5 times we reached for a flaw, and 5 times the flaw turned out to be a foundation stone. This is not luck. This is how the whole universe was built. Herbert did not leave these seams by mistake and hope no one would notice. He laid them deliberately because the seams are where the meaning lives. The single planet makes power possible. The fragile plan makes love matter. The forbidden machine makes the human soul the last frontier. The trapped prophet makes the warning ring true. The hidden people make the underdog rise. Pull any one of these threads to fix it, to make it tidy and closed and safe, and the whole tapestry loosens and falls, because each apparent weakness is bearing the weight of the story above it. And so we arrive at the gentle idea we can carry down into sleep. Some holes are not gaps at all. Some holes are doorways. What looks, in the harsh light of a first reading, like a mistake or an oversight or a thing the author should have fixed, turns out, in the softer light of a longer look, to be exactly the opening through which the meaning enters. The greatest stories are not the ones without seams. They are the ones where the seams are load-bearing, where the very places that seem to threaten collapse are the places holding everything up. To find a plot hole in Dune is not to catch Herbert in an error. It is to find the door he left open for you, the invitation to look closer and discover that the thing you thought was broken was quietly, patiently doing the most important work of all. There is comfort in that, a comfort that reaches beyond the story and into the way we hold our own days. The cracks are not always failures. The open questions are not always faults. Sometimes the place that seems to be coming apart is exactly the place where the light gets in, and the door stands ready, and the meaning waits on the other side. So let the 5 puzzles rest now, each one settled and whole, each one a doorway rather than a wound. Let them lie quiet in the dark, like sand smoothed flat by the wind, and let the wonder of them carry you softly, easily, down toward rest. And now, at the very last, let us go back to where we began, out onto the open desert of Arrakis at night, and simply rest there for a while with nothing left to solve. The 2 moons hang low and pale above the dunes, and their light lies soft across the sand, silvering the long ridges and pooling blue in the hollows between them. The heat of the terrible day has lifted at last, and a cool stillness has come down over everything, the deep hush of a world that has stopped holding its breath. There is no urgency out here now. There is no puzzle waiting to be answered. There is only the sand and the moons and the vast quiet sky, and you, lying warm and safe and far away, letting the last of the day drain gently out of you. Listen, if you like, to the small sounds of the desert night. The wind moving over the crests of the dunes, so soft it is almost a breath. The faint whisper of grains sliding and settling as the cooling sand shifts by the tiniest amount. Somewhere far off, too distant to trouble you, the deep and patient presence of the great worms passing beneath the sea of sand, slow as continents, ancient as the spice itself. Out here, everything moves slowly. Out here, everything has time. And you have time too. All the time in the world. Nothing to hurry toward and nothing to solve. Only this wide and peaceful dark to lie back into. We turned over 5 great puzzles together tonight. And now we can let them settle, one by one, the way sand settles after the wind has passed. There was the spice that the whole universe needs, found on one lonely desert world, and we saw how that single grain of sand became the center of everything, and then we let it go. There was the chosen one who came too soon, born of a mother's love against all the careful plans of centuries. And we saw how love was the one thing the cold calculation could never own, and then we let that go too. Let it settle now, soft and complete, needing nothing more from you. There was the galaxy that outlawed its thinking machines and grew, in their place, the astonishing powers of the human mind, the mentats and the navigators and the sisters who mastered themselves down to the smallest breath. We saw that the forbidden machine was what made the extraordinary human, and we let the puzzle rest. There was the prophet who could see the future and hated what he saw, and walked into it all the same, trapped inside his own myth, a warning we could feel more than argue with. And there were the hidden Fremen, the millions the empire never counted, the overlooked people who became the quiet engine of a whole revolution, their green dream buried patiently beneath the sand. All 5 of them resting now. All 5 of them settled and still. And do you remember the gentle thing we found, the thread that ran through every one of them? That some holes are not gaps at all, but doorways. That the places where a story seems to loosen and fray are so often the very places where its meaning enters. We went looking for mistakes and found foundations instead. We went looking for cracks and found the openings through which the light comes in. There is no need to hold on to that thought tightly now. Let it rest with the rest of them, soft as a hand opening, and let the wonder of it stay behind long after the words have faded. Think, if a last gentle thought is welcome, of how far we traveled tonight without ever leaving this warm and restful place. We went out among the great houses and the folded ships, into the sealed tanks of the navigators and the hidden sea etches of the deep desert, into the mind of a boy who could see tomorrow and the heart of a mother who chose love over obedience. We stood in the shimmer of shields where warfare had grown slow and close and human again. We watched the mightiest power in the universe hold its own hand still, too dependent to dare to rule. And through all of it, the desert waited, patient and vast, the true and quiet center of everything, the one small world upon which the whole enormous story balanced like a grain of sand upon a fingertip. It is a wonderful thing to hold so large a universe in so soft a thought, and then to set it gently down. And notice, as you rest, how little the largeness of it weighs now. Great stories have a way of growing lighter the closer you come to sleep, until the empires and the armies and the ancient schemes become no heavier than a lullaby, no more troubling than the sound of wind moving across the dunes. All the fear has gone out of them. All the striving has gone quiet. What remains is only the shape of the tale, smooth and cool and complete, a thing you can hold loosely in an open hand, and then let slip away without any loss at all, knowing it will still be there, whole and waiting, whenever you wish to return to it. For that is the quiet gift of a story like this one, a story large enough to hold all its own contradictions without ever coming apart. You do not have to finish it. You do not have to solve it. You can simply lie back inside its vastness, the way you are lying back into this desert night, and let it hold you, and let the questions loosen and drift and dissolve like breath on cold air. The puzzles will still be there in the morning, patient and unhurried, waiting to be turned over again some other day. Tonight, they ask nothing of you. Tonight, they only keep you gentle company as you sink toward sleep. Feel how heavy and warm your body has become, how easily it rests now, how the small tensions of the day have loosened their hold one by one. There is nothing left to carry. There is nothing left to work out. The great empire and its scheming houses, the folded ships crossing the dark, the worms beneath the sand and the spice within the worms, all of it turns slowly on without you, needing nothing, asking nothing. A vast and beautiful machine humming softly at the edge of your drifting thoughts. You can let it go. You can let all of it go. The moons are sinking lower now toward the far rim of the dunes, and their pale light grows softer still, and the desert breathes its slow, cool breath around you. The sand has gone quiet. The wind has nearly stilled. Everything that seemed so urgent has settled into place, smoothed flat and calm, waiting for a morning that is still a long, long way off. You are safe here. You are warm here. There is nowhere you need to be, and nothing you need to do. Only this, only rest, only the wide, soft, dark folding gently around you, like a blanket drawn up close. Let your thoughts grow slow and few. Let each one drift up like a grain of sand caught briefly in the moonlight, and then settle back down into the smooth and endless dune. There is no next thing tonight. There is no puzzle left to pull at. There is only the desert and the fading moons and the deep and patient quiet and your own breathing growing slower and softer with every gentle wave of it. Breathe in the cool night air. Breathe it slowly out. And let yourself sink, easily and without effort, down and down into the warm dark where nothing needs solving and everything is already at peace. Rest now. The story will keep. The sand will hold its shape until morning, and the worms will pass on beneath it, and the spice will go on being made in the deep places where no one can see. None of it needs you tonight. All you must do is let go, and drift, and rest, here on the quiet desert, under the sinking moons, safe and warm, and wonderfully far from every question in the world. Sleep well, traveler. Let the puzzles dissolve into the sand. Let the desert keep its secrets,